Welcome back to Lullaby Atlas. Tonight we follow the gentle story of Moses. Close your eyes, let the world fall away. The river is broad and still in the hour before the sun clears the eastern hills. A gray gold light lies flat across the water, soft as the inside of a shell, and the mist drifts low over the surface in long, slow ribbons. Along the western bank, the reeds stand tall and very green, papyrus stalks thick as a man's thumb, their feathery heads nodding in no wind at all, only the river's own slow breathing. A heron stands in the shallows, gray and patient, its reflection perfectly still beneath it. Far beyond the far bank, the land opens into green fields still dark with dew, and beyond those fields the shapes of a great old city rise pale against the brightening sky. Columns and pylons and the distant geometry of things built to outlast time. Egypt is ancient here, very ancient and immense in its patience, and the river runs through it as it has always run, unhurried, carrying the rich dark silt that makes the black fields bloom each year, feeding 10,000 mouths and 10,000 more. The river does not hurry, it never has. It is told that in those days a people had come to dwell in Egypt, the children of Jacob, the family that Joseph had gathered, long ago, to shelter in the years of the great hunger. They had grown numerous in the land over the generations, many and strong, and they had become the hands that built Egypt's great monuments, pressing bricks from the river mud, hauling stone under the wide, hot sky. Their lives were hard and their days were long, and they lived in the shadow of Pharaoh's house, which was vast and old, and did not always look upon them with kindness. Among that people, a woman sat in her house in the early dark before this particular dawn, and her hands had been busy all through the night. Around her on the floor lay the cut stems of papyrus, damp and sweet-smelling, and she had woven them together with careful fingers, weaving them tight, weaving them over and under, the way her mother had taught her and her mother's mother before that. She had sealed the seams with a dark river bitumen, pressing it in with her thumb, testing each join. It was a very small basket. It was the size of a sleeping child. She did not weep while she worked. Her hands were steady and her eyes were clear, because weeping was for later, and the night still had work left in it. She lifted her infant son and held him against her chest for a long moment in the warmth of the small room, breathing in the particular smell of him, warm and milky and new, and then she laid him gently into the basket's curve, tucking linen around him, soft against the weave. He was sleeping. His eyes were closed, and his small fists rested open on the cloth, the way a sleeping child's hands always do, entirely at peace. Before the light was fully in the sky, she carried him down to the river's edge, her feet finding the path through the mud and the wet grass without needing to look. The reeds were thick here, pressing in on either side, and they smelled of green water and river clay, and something clean and older than the city behind her. She knelt in the soft mud at the water's margin and set the basket among the stems, where the reeds grew so close together they could hold it, cradling it on the still surface. The water received it with barely a sound, a small settling, a single soft ripple spreading out and then gone. She stood, and she did not look back, because looking back would have unmade her, and she needed her legs to carry her home. The river held the basket the way the river holds everything, without hurry, without judgment, patient and enormous and indifferent to the smallness of one life or the greatness of it. But the basket did not sink. The reeds held it. The still water held it. And a little way along the bank, half hidden in the tall grass, a girl crouched and watched. She was the child's older sister, and she would not move from that spot until she knew what would become of him. The sun came up slowly over the eastern hills, and the river turned from gray to gold to copper, the light moving across it in long, warm bands. The mist began to lift. In the shallows, the heron did not move, still as a thought, watching the water. And the basket rocked in its small nest of reeds, very gently, barely at all, as if the river were breathing around it, as if the great slow Nile had decided, for this morning at least, to hold this one thing steady. The papyrus smell was sweet in the growing warmth. The lotus flowers on the water began to open, white and pink, petal by petal, in the new light. And then, in the warmth of the morning, voices came along the bank. Light voices, the sound of sandaled feet on the path, the soft splash of water. It is told that Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe, as she often did in the early hours when the air was still cool, and her attendants came with her, carrying linens and small jars of oil and flower garlands for the morning ritual. The river in those days was beloved of all its people, a thing of great reverence, the source of all their abundance, and the princess waded into it as one wades into something holy, with ease and without hurry. One of her attendants noticed it first, a shape among the reeds, half in shadow, rocking on the water. The princess waded to it herself, lifting her white linen above the shallows, the cool river mud soft beneath her feet, and she reached into the papyrus stems with careful hands and drew the basket toward her. She lifted the lid. There was a child inside, warm and wrapped and blinking slowly in the new light, and he looked up at her with the vast, unfrightened eyes of a very small person who has not yet learned to be afraid. Something moved in her face. Something settled. She said, and her voice was quiet, the way voices become when something unexpected and tender has just happened, that this must be one of the children of the people of the river. And she held him, this child she had not known this morning, and she did not put him back. The infant turned his face toward the warmth of her, the way all infants do, searching for what he knew. And from the tall grass along the bank, a girl stepped forward, quietly, carefully, the way you approach something you hope will stay. And she offered to go and find a woman of their people who might nurse the child. The princess said yes, and the girl ran. She ran back along the riverbank path, bare feet on the warm clay, the reeds blurring past her on either side, and she ran through the waking streets where the smell of bread baking had just begun, and she ran to her own house, and she brought her mother. So the child's own mother walked back to the river's edge and stood before the princess and received her son into her arms again, and the river ran on beside them both, quiet and enormous, as if it had known all along this was how the morning would go. She would be paid, the princess said, to care for the child. She would be paid to nurse her own son. It is one of the tender ironies the old story carries without comment, the way a river carries something on its surface and does not stop to remark on it. The mother held him, and his warm weight settled back into her like a stone finding the bottom of still water, everything returning to its natural place. The morning was fully bright now. The mist was gone. The heron was gone. The reeds stood in the sunlight, green and ordinary and very still, as if nothing had happened here at all. The years of nursing passed gently as those early years do, full of milk and small sounds and lamplight in the evenings. And when the boy was old enough, his mother brought him to the palace, as she had promised, and he became the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He was given a name in the language of Egypt, a name that meant, in its way, drawn out, the one drawn out of the water. Moses. He walked into the wide halls of the palace, and the world of Egypt gathered around him. Its polished stone floors, its lotus-headed columns, its walls bright with painted birds and river grasses, its smell of cedar oil and incense, and the ever-present cool breath of the river outside. He grew in that house as children grow in great houses, slowly at first and then all at once, until he was no longer the boy in the painted halls, but a young man who knew the weight of linen and the smell of cedar, and the way the long afternoons settled over the palace rooftops when the Nile flooded its banks, and the whole land turned briefly to a shallow inland sea of brown and silver. Egypt was wondrous, and it was old, and he grew up inside its wonder as though it were the only world there was. But beyond the palace walls, he could hear, on certain still evenings, the sound of other people working, the low rhythmic beat of labor carried on the warm air from the brick fields. The story does not linger in the palace. It tells only that Moses grew, that he knew himself to be of two worlds, the world of the polished floors and the painted ceilings, and the world of the brick fields beyond the wall, and that one day the weight of that knowing became too heavy to carry quietly. Something happened on a day by the brick fields. The story tells it plainly and without embroidery. And Moses found himself an exile, a man who could no longer remain where he was. He left the palace and he left Egypt, and he went out into the wilderness to the east, where the desert opened like a vast hand and the sky was enormous and empty and still. He walked until the city was gone behind him and the desert was everything. The ground turned from the dark silt of the Nile Valley to pale sand and then to red and ochre stone, and the sky deepened above him as he walked, turning from the hazy white of the Egyptian noon to the sharp ringing blue of the open wilderness. The heat sat on his shoulders and the dry wind tasted of nothing, no water, no green, no smoke from anyone's fire. Only the faint chalky smell of hot rock and the whisper of wind-blown dust over the ground. He was alone, and the desert received him the way the desert receives everything, without ceremony, without comment. He came at last to Midian, a land of stony hills and sparse thorn trees and deep-dug wells where the desert people watered their flocks. He sat down by a well in the shade of its low stone wall, exhausted, his feet dusty to the knee, and the stone of the wall was cool against his back. The well water, when he pulled it up, was cold and tasted of deep earth, of the dark underground places where water gathers in silence. While he rested, a group of young women came with their flocks to draw water, and there was some commotion at the well, shepherds pushing in ahead of them, the way it sometimes went. And Moses stood and helped them, simply and without speech, and drew water for their flocks. The young women brought him to their father, the old priest of Midian, a man named Jethro, whose tent was pitched in the high ground where the wind came through in the evenings, with the smell of distant rain and dry grass. Jethro welcomed him with the grave and simple hospitality of the desert people, the kind that asks no questions before the guest has eaten. There was bread and there was goat's milk, and there was the low sound of flocks settling outside as the afternoon cooled. Moses ate and he rested, and in the way of those days the guest became part of the household. And after a time Moses married Jethro's daughter Zipporah, and the desert became his home. He became a shepherd. It is one of the oldest trades the old stories know, and he took to it with the patience of a man who has learned that the world does not accommodate itself to hurry. He walked the hills of Midian for years, many years, leading the flocks through the dry wadis and up onto the stony plateaus where thorn scrub offered thin grazing. His days had the shape and the smell of the desert, dust and lanolin and the warm breath of animals, the sound of small hooves on loose stone, the wide-open silence of the wilderness that settles over everything by midday and does not lift until the stars come out. He learned the land the way you learn anything slowly, by walking it again and again. This is where we leave him now, for the space of a breath. This man who was born to the river and raised in the palace and who walks now in the deep quiet of the Midian wilderness, his staff worn smooth with years of use, his face turned toward the mountains where the light at evening turns the stone from red to rose to violet. He does not yet know what is coming. No one ever does. The flock grazes, the wind moves through the sparse grass on the hillside. The last of the sun touches the peaks and makes them briefly golden, And then the shadow comes up from the east, and the stars, one by one, begin to appear. And it is enough now to rest in this. We follow him now into the great house. The story moves back before the shepherd years, before the desert, before the long walk east, to the beginning of the man, which is the beginning of the prince. The Nile still moves in its ancient way, broad and slow and copper green in the early morning, and the reeds along its banks still hold the memory of a small woven basket, a sleeping child, a sister watching from the shallows. But now the basket is long gone, and the child has been drawn up into another world entirely. The halls of Pharaoh's house are cool even in the height of summer, their stone walls keeping the heat of the world outside at a gentle distance. Columns rise from the floor like lotus stems, each one painted in the deep blue and green and gold of the river itself, their capitals opening wide at the top like flowers perpetually in bloom. The air inside carries the faint sweetness of burning cedar and the clean mineral smell of freshly wetted stone. And the light that enters falls in long, slow bars through narrow, high windows, illuminating the painted walls one slow panel at a time. A child runs along those halls in the early mornings, his feet bare on the cool stone, the sound of his footsteps swallowed almost at once by the immensity of the place. He wears fine linen, white as the egrets that stand at the river's edge, and his dark hair is oiled and dressed in the manner of the house. He is a child of this world, the world of painted walls and cedar chests, of oil lamp ceremonies and great stone gods that watch from their deep-cut niches with steady ancient eyes. He knows no other world yet. There is a garden at the heart of the palace, where a long rectangular pool holds the sky's reflection perfectly still between its banks of blue tile. Date palms and sycamore figs lean over the water, their roots in the cool dark below, their crowns in the full heat of the noon sun. And in the shade between them, the air smells of turned earth and the faint sweetness of white lotus blossoms floating open at the pool's edge. Here the child learns to sit still, to watch the reflections move with the wind, to hold a thing gently without gripping it too hard. The walls of the great rooms are covered in stories, painted in ochre and lapis and malachite green, stories of harvests and river floods, of great hunts in the papyrus marshes, of gods with the heads of hawks and ibises and jackals presiding over the orderly procession of the dead. It is a world of immense age and immense order, and the child grows up understanding that he is a small part of something vast, something that began before any memory and intends to continue long after any single life. He finds this comfortable. He does not yet find it troubling. His mother comes to the palace. The old story says the princess brought her to nurse the child, not knowing what she was doing. And the woman who held him was the very woman who had wept over the basket in the reeds. She speaks to him in a language that is not the palace language. In the evenings when the lamps are lit and the rest of the world has grown quiet, and the words of it settle into him the way river silt settles into the floor of a valley, invisibly, permanently, becoming the very ground he stands on. So he grows, year by year in the palace, year by year in that cool world of linen and cedar and painted stone, and he carries inside him, without perhaps fully understanding it, something that does not belong to the palace, a language heard in lamplight, a story told quietly, almost under the breath. The old story says the princess named him Moses, drawn out, for she had drawn him from the water. And perhaps it is fitting that the name itself contains a pulling, a drawing toward and away, a life that will always be moving between one world and another. The city that spreads beyond the palace walls is full of sound and motion. The creak of rope and pulley, the slap of wet clay on wooden forms, the low, steady rhythm of many hands at work under the open sky. Beyond the gardened courtyards and the shaded colonnades, the world is all sun and effort and red-brown earth. Great building works rise on the edge of the city where the desert begins, long walls of mud brick drying in rows, the smell of river clay and chopped straw hanging in the hot air, like the smell of a field after rain. The mud bricks are made in the oldest way, river clay and chopped straw kneaded together in the shallows, pressed into wooden molds, turned out in long rows to bake hard in the sun. There is a particular smell to them when they are new, dark and green from the river, faintly sweet from the straw, and a different smell when they are old and dry and stacked, which is the smell of the earth itself compacted into building blocks, patient and enduring. These bricks will outlast the men who make them. Some of them outlast everything. He is a young man the first time he goes out to where his people labor, and the old story does not dwell long on what moved him to go, only that he went and that he saw. He has grown up knowing, in the abstract way one can know a thing without truly feeling it, that the people of the brick fields are kin to him. Now the knowing moves out of the abstract and into the body. The heat is a weight on the shoulders. The dust is in the mouth. The sound of effort under the noon sun is a sound that does not stop. He walks among the brickworks quietly, in the linen of the palace, and the contrast is the kind of thing that once seen cannot be unseen. The cool hall behind him, with its dripping lotus columns and its still reflecting pool, and this, the clay and the straw and the heavy sun and the backs bent under it. Something turns in him. Not a sudden thing, not a crack of lightning, but a slow, quiet, irreversible turning, like a riverbed shifting after a long flood, like stone wearing to a new form under the patient work of water. He is not the same after. It is told that one day the turning became action, that he saw an overseer striking one of his people, and that something in him rose up and acted before he could think. The story does not linger there, and neither will this telling. The camera rests only on what comes after. The brick field quiet in the long afternoon, the dust settling back over the disturbed ground, a stillness that is heavier than ordinary stillness. He looks around at the empty plain of drying clay. He looks at what he has done, and he understands in the deepest part of him that something is now forever changed. He had thought no one saw. But the old story says that by the next day, the word had already moved through the brick fields and the river settlements in the way that words move through close communities, by morning light and whisper, by one hand passing a water vessel to another, by the quick exchange of glances over the heads of the overseers. And when his own people looked at him the next day, he found not welcome but fear. And in that fear he read the truth he had not yet fully admitted to himself, that he had nowhere left to stand that was safe. Pharaoh hears. How word travels up the long corridors of the palace, through the scribes' rooms and the grain masters' offices, and the outer courts where petitions are filed and heard, the story does not say exactly, only that it travels, as such things do, and that when it arrives changed and magnified, the way a stone dropped in still water makes rings that spread and grow. And in the palace that has been his home for all his life, the prince finds suddenly that he is no longer a prince. He is a man who must go. He gathers what a man can carry. The story gives him no cart, no escort, no fine send-off. He goes in the early hours when the city is still held in that blue-gray hush between the last star and the first true light, when the dogs have stopped and the birds have not yet begun. The palace recedes behind him. Its great pylons and painted gateways grow smaller with each step, and he does not, the story does not say he does not, look back. He may look back, but there is nothing behind him now that he can return to, and the road only runs one way. The eastern desert opens before him slowly, the way deserts always do. The city thinning first into its outermost quarter of mud brick houses, then into the pottery yards and the rubbish fires and the tethered donkeys at the edge of settlement, and then into nothing, the flat, hard pan of the desert floor, pale as old bone, stretching away toward hills the color of dried blood on the horizon. The air changes immediately, loses the smell of the river, loses the smell of cook fires and cedar and clay, and becomes dry and mineral and immense. The sky above it is enormous. Behind him now, the Nile is invisible, the palace invisible, the lotus column halls and the reflecting pool and the cedar-scented rooms invisible. The river that made him is behind him. The people he came from are behind him. The world is a wide-open hand of rock and sand and pale sky, and he is one small moving thing within it. His feet, used to cool stone floors, learn the heat of the desert hardpan. His skin, used to the shade of colonnades, learns the full weight of the Egyptian sun. Everything that was comfort is behind him. Everything that is next is ahead. The story does not rush him. It lets him walk. There will be time enough for the well in Midian and the priest's daughters and the long shepherd years still ahead. But for now, in this telling, the pace slows to the pace of a man crossing open ground on foot, one step at a time, carrying only what he can carry. The city of his childhood grows small behind him, small as a line drawn in ochre on a pale wall, and then smaller still. And then the hills rise between him and it, and there is only the desert and the road, and the dry, cooling wind that comes before evening. He walks east, and the ground changes under his feet. The smooth stones of the city road give way to packed earth, and then to loose gravel that shifts and whispers with each step, and then to the open desert floor, wide, flat, the color of old bone under the afternoon sun. The air loses its river smell, that green coolness of the Nile, and becomes something thinner and cleaner, like the inside of a clay jar left in the shade. The wind moves across the plain without interruption, carrying only the faint, dry scent of heated stone. Behind him, at the edge of seeing, the green ribbon of the river valley still shows, a thin, dark line of palm and reed against the pale world, the last color of Egypt dissolving in the heat shimmer. He does not turn back to look at it often. The road pulls him forward, not with urgency, but with the quiet insistence of a path that has only one direction. The hills ahead are red gold, layered like the pages of a very old book, their colors deepening as the sun begins its long lean toward evening, and the shadows start to reach across the ground. There is a particular quality to desert silence that is different from the silence of rooms or gardens. It is not empty. It is full of small sounds, each one distinct. The soft crunch of a footstep, the tick of a stone cooling in the shade, the distant circling cry of a hawk too high to see, the wind moving over a ledge of rock with a low and patient note, like a breath drawn slowly out. He walks inside this silence. The noise of the court, the sound of raised voices and urgent footsteps, and the clank of bronze in corridors, recedes not all at once, but gradually, like water draining from cupped hands. The first night catches him on open ground, and he does what travelers in that country have always done. He finds a low shelf of rock that breaks the wind, spreads his cloak on the still warm ground, and lies down under a sky so thick with stars it seems almost solid overhead. There is no lamp, no ceiling, no sound of the palace settling in the dark. Only the stars, and the cold that comes quickly once the sun is gone, and the dry, clean smell of the desert at night, which is something like stone and something like time, faintly, and something like nothing at all. He wakes to a sky that is all amber and rose in the east and still dark violet in the west, the stars withdrawing one by one like lamps being carried away through a great hall. The desert in that first light is extraordinarily beautiful, the red hills picking up the color of dawn, each stone casting a long, thin shadow west, the gravel plain glittering faintly with the night cold still on it. He is very hungry and very alone, and the beauty of the place does not solve either of those things, and yet there is something in it that is not nothing. He rises and walks on. The days have a rhythm to them now, a slow, reliable rhythm he has never known before. Walk in the cool of the morning, when the light is low and golden and the air still carries the night in it. Rest through the high heat, in whatever shade the land offers. A canyon wall, a boulder's shadow, the underside of a rock overhang where the stone is cool and slightly damp to the touch. Walk again in the late afternoon when the light shifts to copper and the long shadows make the ground easy to read. Stop at dark. Sleep under the same stars, different only in that each night they wheel a little further on. We go with him now into the land of Midian, where the desert takes on a different character, no longer simply flat and pale, but broken into ridges and valleys. The rock darker here, basalt and granite showing through the red, the hills shaped like shoulders, like sleeping animals, like the ruins of things larger than anything built by hands. Acacia trees appear along the dry watercourses, their flat-topped canopies dark green against all that red and gold, their roots finding water that no eye can see. The land is austere and magnificent, and entirely indifferent to the small figure moving through it. And then, on a late afternoon when the light is going gold and the air smells faintly of dust and something green and distant, he comes over a low rise and sees it below him. A well. It is not much to look at, a circle of worn stones, the rim smoothed by years and years of hands and rope, a low wall around it, the ground around the mouth dark with spilled water. But in this dry country it is everything. The sight of it in the long golden light makes something ease in him, the way the body unknots when it has been carrying a weight for so long it had forgotten the weight was there. He makes his way down to it and sits on the low wall, and for a little while he simply breathes. The stone is still warm under his hands from the day's sun, but the air coming up out of the well is cool, that particular cool of deep water, of depth and dark and the world underground. He cups his hands and drinks, and the water tastes of stone and cold and something faintly mineral, clean in a way that river water never quite is. A goat comes and investigates his sandal and wanders away again, unimpressed. In the distance, the hills are turning from gold to rose to lavender as the sun drops behind them. The sound comes before the sight of them, the soft clatter of hooves on stone, the light voices of women calling to one another, the particular bell and shuffle sound a flock makes when it is moving together towards something it wants. 7 of them come, daughters of the household, with their father's flocks behind them, sheep and goats in a pale gray stream, pressing eagerly toward the water. The women move with the ease of people who have done this every evening of their lives, pulling up the rope, filling the long stone troughs, calling individual animals by sound or name as each comes to drink. Others arrive, men with their own flocks, arriving after the women, shouldering in to claim the well before the daughters of the priest of Midian can finish. It is a rough claiming, the kind that happens at wells in dry lands when water is the only abundance, and custom has yet to settle who must wait and who goes first. He watches for a moment from his place on the wall, a tired stranger, a man with nothing but a traveler's robe and the dust of many days, walking on him, and then he stands up quietly and draws the water himself and waters their flock. It is not a dramatic thing. He simply does it. Draws the rope hand over hand, again and again, filling the troughs until the stone channels run with cool, dark water and the animals are satisfied, pressing their muzzles down with the concentrated peace of creatures who are drinking their fill at the end of a warm day. The sound of water pouring into stone in the desert evening is one of the most beautiful sounds there is, low and liquid and absolutely sure of itself. Each pour a small act of abundance in all that dry air. The women watch him, and when it is done, they go. They go home early, earlier than their father expected. And when he asks why they have come back before the other flocks are even home, they tell him, an Egyptian watered the flock for them. The priest of Midian, Jethro, is quiet a moment. Then he asks them where the man is and why they left him at the well, and he sends word back, "Bring him in." It is the kind of hospitality that is very old in that country, the kind that is not a courtesy, but a law. Older than any written law, the understanding that a stranger in the desert must be fed and sheltered and given rest. He comes to the tent of Jethro as the last light leaves the sky and the first stars take their places. Not the palace of Pharaoh, not the halls of lotus columns, not the cool rooms where the lamps burned in golden brackets along the walls. A tent, goat hair woven close against the wind, the scent of lanolin and cook's smoke, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging from a cord. A mat spread on the ground, a cup brought and pressed into his hands, the warmth of a low fire in the entrance, and a meal set before him. Bread and lentils, and the sharp white taste of soft cheese, simple and inexhaustible and good. He stays. That is the way the story tells it. Quietly, without ceremony, he stays. One night becomes several, and several becomes a season, and the season opens into years. Jethro, the old priest of Midian, sees in the stranger something steady and unhurried, a man in whom the desert has already begun its work, the slow work of stripping away everything that was given rather than grown. In time, one of the 7 daughters, Zipporah, becomes his wife, and the bond is made not with gold and ceremony, but with the simplest things: her hand, the light of a common lamp, a life taken up together in that wide, dry land. The years of the desert are slow and full. He learns the names of the wadis and the dry watercourses, the places where water can be found below the surface by the color of the rock above it, the way the wind changes before a storm in the hills, and the sound that comes off the granite ridges at midday when the heat is at its height. He learns the flocks, each animal with its temper and its habits, the young ones fragile and demanding, the old ewes steady as stones, the rams restless in the cool of the morning. He carries the shepherd's staff, a long plain rod of acacia wood, worn smooth by handling, and it is entirely unlike anything he ever carried in Pharaoh's house. The flock teaches him patience in the way that only living things can teach it, not as a lesson explained, but as a practice repeated until the body understands it. A lamb lost in a crevice found by listening, a ewe who will only drink from one particular channel of the trough and must be waited for. The long afternoon watches on a high ridge while the flock grazes below, the whole world going golden and slow around him. The shadows of clouds moving across the valley floor far down like the hands of some vast, unhurried clock. He is a man learning to be still, and the desert is a very patient teacher. There are evenings in the long peace of those Midian years when he sits outside the tent as the cooking fire burns down to embers, the children of his new household asleep inside, Zipporah's quiet voice sometimes audible behind the woven wall, and the stars so thick overhead that the dark between them seems almost incidental, just the thin gaps in a ceiling of light. He is far from Egypt, and yet Egypt is not far from him. It moves in his memory the way a dream moves, still present, not yet released. The people he came from, the people building in the heat and the mud, the sound of their voices, all of it waits in him, patient as the stars. The long peace of the shepherd years settles into him like water into dry ground, slowly, invisibly, entirely. The man who left the city in haste and confusion has become something else here, quieter, harder, more patient, knowing the desert as a man knows his own house. His hands, which once were smooth, are calloused now with rope and stone and the dry wood of the staff. His face carries the lines of years lived outside under an unflinching sun. He is a man who has been emptied out and slowly, in the silence of that wide land, filled with something quieter and more durable. And the desert keeps its peace around him, and the stars keep their long round, and for a time, for a good long time, the world is still. We follow him now into the slow, deep turning of those years. The flock goes out each morning before the light has fully come, and Moses walks behind it on the stony track, the worn staff swinging easy in his hand, the cold air carrying the faint green scent of whatever thin grass the night's dew has brought up between the rocks. The sheep move with the unhurried certainty of creatures who know the land better than any prince ever did, and he has learned, by now, to trust their reading of it. Dawn comes to the desert of Midian like a slow breath drawn in. The eastern ridges catch the first light and hold it a moment, a thin line of copper, then rose, then a wide, warm gold that pours down the stone slopes and fills the dry valleys like water. The shadows of the rocks stretch long and cool across the ground, and the flock fans out into those shadows, cropping at the spare dry grass that grows in the crevices, where even stone, given enough time, will relent and soften. The valleys he walks are old beyond reckoning. Their walls are the color of dried clay and cinnamon, and sometimes a deep dark red that seems in the low light almost to glow from within. Wind has smoothed the stones underfoot into rounded shapes, each one worn and patient, and the sound his sandals make on them, a soft, dry, unhurried scuff, is one of the few sounds in the world on a still morning. That and the low voices of the sheep and the occasional sharp call of a bird above the cliff. He has learned the waters. In a desert, water is the whole art of living, and over the years he has come to know each spring and seep and well the way another man might know the rooms of his house, by the particular sound each makes, by the smell of the air when one is near, by the way the grasses change. Here a shallow pool tucked under an overhang of rock, cold and clear, the stone around it furred with moss of a green so bright it seems impossible against all that ochre and dust. At noon the heat settles over the land like something laid gently down upon it. The light becomes white, then whiter still, and the far mountains dissolve at their bases into a wavering silver haze that makes them appear to float, unanchored, above the earth. Moses rests in the shade of a great boulder, and the flock gathers near, standing close, their wool radiating a warm animal smell that is somehow companionable. The rock behind him holds the cold of the night still in its deep grain, though the sun above is absolute. In the deep of the afternoon rest he does not sleep so much as drift, his eyes half closed against the white glare beyond the boulder's shadow, watching the light move almost imperceptibly across the ground. An ant crossing a pale flat stone, a dry seed case turning once in a breath of warm air and settling again. The land is so quiet that these small things become the whole world for a moment. The ant, the turning seed, the thin whisper of air, and the years in the palace, the years of hurry and calculation, grow faint and far as a story told about someone else. The flock knows when the worst of the heat has passed. Long before Moses feels it himself, the sheep begin to stir, pulling themselves to their feet with a quiet, settled purpose, and turning their noses toward whatever thin movement of air carries the first green coolness of the later afternoon. He rises and follows, and the walking resumes on the other side of the day's still center, the shadows now growing on the opposite walls of the valleys, the light beginning its slow, warm change from white to gold. There is a green place he knows, a day's walk to the east, where a rill of water, barely worth the name, just a threading of cool water over flat gray stones, has kept alive a long, narrow meadow of real grass, soft and dark, running between two ridges. He brings the flock there at the height of spring, when the water runs strongest, and the lambs born only weeks before have their first taste of true green abundance. The soft, tearing sound of young mouths full of grass, the small, bright sound of water, a lark somewhere above the ridge. The lambing itself is a tender, absorbed business, and Moses has learned to sit very still through it, close but not crowding, present but not intruding. The ewe knows what to do. She has always known. He only watches in the cold gray hour before dawn, his cloak pulled close, his breath a small cloud in the dark air. And when it is finished and the lamb is standing on its first uncertain legs, there is something in the moment. The lamb's first sound, so small, the mother's answering, the cold air softening almost imperceptibly toward a pale, thin dawn. That is beyond naming. He learns to read the sky the way shepherds have always read it, not as a ceiling, but as a living thing. Its colors and textures and the direction of its high, thin clouds, all carrying information about what the next hours will bring. A certain bruised purple at the western edge of dawn means wind before noon. A particular stillness in the upper air, a bronze quality to the evening light, means the night will go cold past what the cloak alone can manage. And the fire must be built before it is dark. He misses almost nothing now. The palace made him quick. The desert has made him watchful. The evenings are long and beautiful, in a way the young man he once was would not have had the patience to see. The sun drops behind the western ridges, and for a time the whole desert is bathed in a light that is not quite orange and not quite rose, a light that seems to come from everywhere at once and from nowhere in particular, warming every surface it touches. The pale dust of the path, the rounded stones, the close-cropped grass of the evening pasture, the fleeces of the flock moving slowly homeward, everything given, for those minutes, the same soft and equal tenderness. He makes his fire from what the desert offers, dried wood from the acacia, small and dense and good for burning, flat stones gathered into a ring, the dry grass of the morning for tinder. The fire takes hold with a quiet willingness, a small, warm thing in all that great cold dark, and he sits near it and eats what he has brought, the simple food of the shepherd's day, and the smoke rises straight up into the still air, a slow, thin thread, and the stars come out one by one above it until the whole sky is crowded with them, cold and brilliant and still. The stars of the desert are a different thing from the stars seen through a palace window. Out here they press close, closer, it seems, than they have any right to be. And on a moonless night, the Milky Way falls across the sky in a wide, soft river of light, and the darkness between stars is not empty, but full, as if the dark itself were made of something deep and patient and waiting. Moses has slept under this sky for years, his cloak beneath him on the stone, and he no longer finds it cold or austere. He finds it rather like a hand held open above him, vast and very still. The seasons of that land are not four but two. The hot, dry months when the world turns ochre and the sky is a dome of unbroken blue, and the brief season of rains when thin clouds build against the mountains and the wadies run with brown, fast water, and the desert, for a few weeks, turns faintly, startlingly green. Moses has seen both dozens of times, and the change no longer surprises him but gladdens him. The first smell of rain on hot stone, which is a smell like no other in the world, a sharp mineral sweetness rising from the earth even before the first drop falls. In the dry months, he finds water at the wells, wide stone-ringed wells sunk deep into the desert floor, and he draws for the flock with a rope worn smooth in his hands, the bucket coming up cold and dark and heavy, and the sheep drink with a devoted, unhurried intensity that is, in the silence and the heat, almost moving. The stone rim of the well is worn in long, curved grooves where the rope has run for generations, ropes before his rope, hands before his hands, flocks before his flock. The land holds its past in its bones that way, patient, unmarked, legible only to the very quiet. The silence of the desert is not empty. This is what he has come to understand. It is full of the wind's small negotiations with the rock, full of the cooling tick of stone at night, full of the distant calling of birds in the upper air, full of a quality that has no name in any language he was taught in the palace or learned in Midian. He stopped trying to name it some years ago. He lives inside it instead, the way a fish lives in water, without thinking of it, simply moved by it, simply held in it, the long noise of his former life draining away like water through sand. He passes whole days without speech. Back at the tent of Jethro, the priest of Midian, there is the warm, ordinary talk of family, the voices of Zipporah and the children, the easy exchange of the evening meal, the small negotiations of household life, and he is present there with a genuine, quiet gladness. But in the desert, leading the flock out over the long, stony slopes, he walks in a silence that has grown comfortable as an old garment. And the absence of words does not feel like loss. It feels, if anything, like abundance, as if something has been given back that he did not know he had surrendered. There is a particular slope on the flank of the mountain to the west, a wide, gently tilted plateau of reddish rock, smooth in places, scattered in others with dark basalt stones worn round by ancient water, where Moses brings the flock in the cooler months, when the thin highland grass is at its best. From that slope he can see far, the long valley running north and south, the haze of the lower desert to the east, and beyond it, on a very clear day, a line of mountains so distant they are the same color as the sky, pale blue, nearly invisible, barely there. The years have made him lean and weathered and very still in his movements, the kind of stillness that comes not from laziness, but from a long familiarity with things that require patience, a ewe in labor, a nervous young ram at the edge of the flock, a thin rain coming in from the west that might feed the grass or might pass away to nothing. He does not hurry these things. He does not hurry anything. The desert has given him this, slowly, over years of hot noon and cold night, and it is a gift so quietly given he could not have said when it arrived. So the years turn, each one like the slow turning of a wheel, each one wearing a little more away from him. Not the good things, not the care or the capacity for love or the memory of suffering, but the restlessness, the urgency, the sense that there is always somewhere else to be. What remains after the wearing is something simpler and stronger, a man who knows how to find water in a dry land, how to wait through the dark, cold hours for the dawn, how to read the sky and walk all day and be content with the fire and the stars and the breath of the flock in the night around him. The old noise is gone. He does not know what comes next. He is in this entirely at peace. One ordinary morning, neither early nor late, Moses leads the flock further than usual, past the familiar water, past the gray-brown gravel flats where the goats like to pick among the stones. The sky is pale and enormous above the desert, and the mountain called Sinai rises ahead of him, its red flanks warming slowly as the sun climbs. He has walked this way before, perhaps, or perhaps not quite this far. The flock moves quietly, a soft sound of hooves on dry ground, the occasional low breath of an animal, the gentle clink of a small stone turned underfoot. The mountain's lower slopes are scattered with loose rock and thorn scrub, the air already warm but still carrying the night's coolness in its lowest currents, close to the ground. Small lizards flicker between stones. The pale dust rises in thin wisps where the sheep pass. Moses walks slowly, the worn staff resting easy in his hand, its wood smooth where his palm meets it, dark from years of holding. He is not thinking of anything particular. He is simply here, on this ordinary slope, under this wide and ordinary sky, and the flock moves quietly ahead of him. Then he sees it. On a low shelf of the mountainside, perhaps 30 paces away, a bush is burning, not blazing, not roaring, burning quietly, wrapped in a soft and steady golden flame, the light warm and very still in the dry air. He stops. The flock grazes on without him. He stands and watches, because this is the thing that does not make sense. The flame does not spread, the branches do not blacken, the leaves do not curl and fall. The bush burns and is entirely, quietly itself. He turns aside from the path toward it. This is a small, particular thing. A man turning aside from where he was going in the middle of an ordinary day, to look more carefully at something that does not fit the world he knows. The stones are warm underfoot. The air near the bush smells faintly of heat, of something dry and sweet and clean, the way the desert smells after a long, still afternoon. The flame moves very slightly, the way a candle moves when a breath crosses it, though there is no breath here. The mountain stands enormous and quiet above. And then the voice comes. It is heard in the telling the way some things are heard in deep stillness, not loud, not startling, but present and entirely real. It calls his name, and he answers, "Here I am." That is all, and it is enough. He is told to stop where he stands, to take the sandals from his feet, because the ground on which he stands is holy ground. He does not understand all of what that means, but he does it. He reaches down and loosens the worn leather and sets his bare feet on the stone, and the rock is warm and dry and still beneath him. The voice speaks on, quietly from the fire. It tells him what the old story says it told him, that it has heard a long cry, a cry going up out of Egypt for more years than any one person could count, the cry of his people under a burden too heavy to carry alone. It is heard, and it will not leave that cry unanswered. The words come to him not like a decree, but like something confirmed after a very long time. A thing that was always true being said aloud at last. The bush glows steadily. The flame does not waver. The sky above the mountain is going the pale gold of late afternoon. And then it tells him what he is to do. He is to go back to Egypt. He is to stand before the great house and speak on behalf of his people and lead them out from that place and bring them through the desert toward a wide, good land, a land of olive trees and fig trees, of water that does not run dry, of ground that yields grain and oil and the things a family needs to grow. Moses stands very still. The desert is entirely silent around him. Only the small, soft sound of the flock grazing somewhere below on the slope reaches him on the warm air. He is afraid. Not with the fear that shouts, but with the quiet fear of a man who knows himself, who knows his own smallness, his own hesitations, the way words sometimes leave him before he can shape them. He says what the old story says he said. Who am I to go to Pharaoh, to lead so many people out of such a great place? The question is not cowardice, it is honest. He is a shepherd on a hillside. He has been a shepherd on a hillside for a long time now, and he is content with that. He does not feel like the man for this. He says that he is slow of speech, that the words do not come quickly enough, that standing before a king and speaking for a multitude is not a thing he knows how to do. And the voice does not argue with him or dismiss what he says. Instead, it offers him something gentle. His brother Aaron, who is easy with words, who knows how to speak in public, who will stand beside him and give voice to what Moses carries. The two of them together, the one who sees and the one who speaks, will be enough. That is the shape of the answer. Not that Moses must become someone else, but that he will not go alone. And there is one more thing. The old story says he is given a sign, quiet, simple, unspectacular, so that when the long road ahead grows very hard, he will remember this place. The plain staff in his hand, worn smooth and ordinary, is given a quiet power as a sign of what stands behind him. He will carry it with him back to Egypt, back to the court of Pharaoh, back through every long, difficult thing that lies ahead. It is still only a stick of wood, but it is also more than that now, in the way that all ordinary things can become more than they appear when they are carried in the right hands. Here, in this still desert place, the old story holds quietly, that the one who had spoken from the gentle fire would be with him, not only in this moment of light and warmth and the clean smell of the evening coming on, but all the way through. On the roads he had not yet walked, in the rooms he had not yet entered, in the silences that would not yield, and the nights when he would not know the way. The bush glows on steadily. The desert is utterly still. Moses stands barefoot on the holy ground and breathes the cool air coming down off the mountain. The voice grows quiet. The flame of the bush settles, still burning, still present, but no longer speaking. The evening is coming down the mountain now in long blue shadows, and the rock beneath his feet has lost some of its daytime warmth. Moses reaches down and takes up his sandals and fastens them again slowly, one after the other, the familiar leather familiar between his fingers. Then he straightens and stands for a long moment looking at the bush, which burns still in the gathering dusk, a small warm light in a wide darkening desert, patient and steady as a lamp set in a window. He picks up his staff from the rock where he had laid it. The wood is cool now in the evening air, and the mountain above is a dark shape against a sky going the color of old bronze at its edge and deep blue overhead, the first stars beginning to show, very faint and very far. He calls the flock together, a low sound, a soft repeated call, and they come to him from among the stones, their breath clouding faintly in the cold that is settling with the dark. He turns back down the slope, away from the glowing bush, and the flock moves with him, and the desert is quiet, and the stars come out one by one. Behind him on the mountainside, the bush still glows. If one were to look back, and perhaps he does once, just before the slope bends and the bush passes from sight, it would appear as only a small, warm light among the rocks, a gentle amber flame in the immense dark of the desert evening. The mountain rising enormous and silent above it, the stars thickening overhead. Nothing spectacular, only a fire that does not go out, on a slope where a man had stood barefoot and heard his name spoken, and answered, and been changed, and turned back toward the world. He walks through the night in the old familiar way, the staff tapping the stone, the flock breathing softly around him, the cold air on his face, the stars in their ancient patterns overhead. But something has shifted in the quality of the silence. The desert is the same desert it was this morning. The stars are the same stars. And yet the man walking is not quite the man who walked out this morning, and the staff in his hand is not quite the same. He walks back to the tents of Jethro in the small hours before dawn, when the sky is still deep and the cooking fires have burned to ash. The sheep are quiet on the hillside. A goat shifts and settles. He stands a moment at the entrance to the tent. The smell of wool and smoke and dry grass, the soft sound of his children sleeping, and he breathes it all in, the way a man breathes in a place he has loved when he knows the morning will ask him to leave it. In the morning he speaks with the priest of Midian. The old man sits in the shade of a tamarisk tree, the light coming through the thin gray-green leaves in slow-moving patches on the ground. There is honey and flatbread and the last of the morning's cool air. What passes between them is told in the old story very simply. He asks to go, and the priest of Midian gives him his blessing. It is a quiet leave-taking. No ceremony, no great speech. The bread is eaten. The shadow of the tamarisk shifts. He takes up the staff. It is the same staff he has carried through these hills for years, worn smooth at the grip, the wood darkened with the oil of many hands, the tip worn down on stone. He knows the weight of it the way he knows the weight of his own breathing. And yet he carries it differently now, out of the courtyard and onto the western road, where the hills of Midian stand gold in the early light, and the road ahead disappears into the wide, pale bowl of the desert. Zipporah and the children walk beside him. We follow him now back along the road he came, the road he walked years ago in the other direction, barefoot and frightened and alone. The desert has not changed. The red mountains to the south are the same red mountains. The acacia trees stand in the same low places where water once ran underground. The hot wind moves through the same dry grasses in the same slow way. But he walks west now, not east. The compass of his life has turned, quietly and completely, and every step carries him back toward the land of the great river. The days on the road have their own quiet rhythm, the cool blue of early morning, when the stars are still visible low on the western horizon and the ground is cold underfoot. The slow whitening heat of midday, when the light presses down and the whole world seems to hold its breath. And then the long amber softening of evening, when the shadows stretch out long behind them and the desert floor glows copper and rose. A donkey carries the younger children and a few bundles. The goats pick their way along the margin of the path, unhurried. At night, the stars come out enormous and close, the way they do in deep desert, not the faint, scattered sparks of a hazy sky, but great, bright, steady lights arranged in their old patterns above the cooling rock. The fire is small. The jackals call somewhere far off and are answered by silence. He sits with the staff across his knees and watches the fire burn down, and the land around him is the same land it always was. Ancient and patient and unconcerned with any single life crossing its face. And yet, it is where he is going. He is going. It is told that before he reaches Egypt, his brother comes out to meet him. Aaron, who has been waiting, who has been told in his own quiet way to go and find his brother in the desert. The story does not say how they recognize each other across the years of distance. Perhaps it is simply the way a person knows their own kin. Something in the bearing, something in the walk. They meet on the road in the open desert, somewhere between Midian and the river lands of Egypt, with nothing around them but dust and sky and the old flat light. They speak together for a long while, the story says, there on the road. The words are not all preserved. What a man says to a brother he has not seen in years, in the middle of a desert, when the thing asked of him is large and strange, and the destination is the land of Pharaoh. Only this much comes through. They speak, and they understand each other, and when they rise and take up their things and walk on, they walk together. Two figures now instead of one, small against the great bare hills, moving west toward the delta and the river and the smell of water. As the land changes, as the red rock gives way to the pale limestone hills and the limestone hills give way to the greener, slower, wetter world of the delta, they begin to see the signs of Egypt from a distance. A column of smoke from a brick field, a line of palm trees dark against the pale sky, the particular green of irrigated land, the distant winking light off a canal's slow water. The smell of the air changes too, from dry mineral rock and dust to something softer and older, the river smell, the black earth smell, the smell of a land that has been tended for 10,000 years. Egypt receives them quietly. There are mud brick villages beside the road, low and earth-colored, smelling of chaff and cooking oil and damp reed. Children look up from doorways. A woman carries a jar on her head past a fig tree. An ox moves slowly in a circle at a grain press, its great dark eyes patient. The land is enormous and old and does not hurry. The temples on the horizon rise calm and permanent in the heat, their pylons like two hands raised flat to the sky, their painted surfaces still brilliant in the afternoon light, ancient and immovable as the hills. They find the people among whom he was born, who have been here in the brick fields and the labor for long generations. The story says they gather, and that Moses and Aaron speak to them, and that what is said is received with something deep and grateful, the way people receive news they have not dared to hope for. This too is held gently by the old story, without spectacle. A lamp in a low house, voices in the evening, the particular quiet of a people who have learned to keep their hoping very close and very still, the way you keep a flame close in the wind. And then the road to Pharaoh. The approach to the royal city is a long avenue of stone, sphinxes on either side, worn smooth by centuries of wind and sun, their faces serene and enormous, gazing past the living toward whatever the desert gazes at. The ground is hot underfoot, even through sandals. The air smells of limestone dust and incense from the temple precinct on the left, a deep resinous smell, thick and permanent, the smell of offerings made every day for generations without counting. Moses walks this avenue with the shepherd's staff in his hand, and the sound of his footsteps is very quiet on the stone. The entrance to the palace is through great pylons of painted stone, hawks and lotus blossoms in brilliant blue and gold across their faces, the old writing covering every surface in its careful, beautiful columns. The proportions are staggering. The doors are 4 times the height of a man, and the shadow cast by the lintel lies cold across the threshold like a stripe of winter in the Egyptian heat. To walk through this door is to feel how small a single life is against the accumulated weight of 10,000 years of kings in stone. Inside, a hall of lotus columns. This is what the old story walks them into. Not a room, but a forest of stone, each column as thick as 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, painted in the deep colors of the river's edge, green reed and blue lotus, and the red of the Nile clay at flood. The ceiling is so high it collects its own shadow, a dimness overhead as if the sky has been invited in and gone dark with the effort. The light falls in long shafts from clerestory windows set high in the walls, and in each shaft the fine dust of the stone hangs still and golden. At the far end of the hall, the throne. The story does not ask us to look at the face of the one who sits there. The throne is enough, the fact of it, the weight of it. It is a great carved seat of gold and cedar and ebony, raised on a platform of polished stone, flanked by figures of gods in their stillness, the jackal-headed, the ibis-headed, the falcon-crowned, standing calm and permanent in the cool hall air. Whatever human warmth the hall might once have held has been drawn out by the architecture, the way heat leaves a stone at night. It is grand and cold and still. The asking is simple. That is what the old story preserves about it, the simplicity of the request. Let the people go. Let them journey out into the desert, away from the brick fields and the labor, out into the open land. It is said quietly, in the ringing quiet of that stone hall. The shepherd's staff is there, the humblest thing in all of Egypt, held steady in that space of gold and painted stone, among the grandest architecture the ancient world had made. Whatever the staff has become since the mountain, it looks here like what it is, a piece of bent and worn smooth wood from the desert. The answer is no. It comes back across the hall the way cold comes down from high stone, not with anger, not with violence, just with the flat certainty of something that has never been questioned. The people will not go, the people will work, and the work, after this asking, is made heavier, as if the asking itself were a presumption that must be answered with more weight. The hall is very quiet when the answer is given. The dust in the light shafts hangs motionless. The god statues at the throne's edge look out with their ancient painted eyes at nothing in particular. Moses and Aaron walk back down the length of the hall. The columns pass on either side. The painted faces of the gods watch from the walls. Under his feet, the polished floor is cold even through leather, and his own footsteps are the only sound in all that stone. He has been told, before he came, that the asking would not be answered at once, that there would be a long patience required, a long waiting, a long return again and again to this cold place with the same quiet request. He knew this before he walked in. He walks out now the same man who walked in. The staff is still in his hand. Outside, the heat receives them. The avenue of sphinxes is unchanged. The palms beyond the temple wall are unchanged. The sky is its old blue self, enormous and empty and indifferent. Somewhere across the city, the brick fields are working. The sound of it carries in the afternoon stillness, the dull rhythm of labor, the distant sound of a foreman's call, the creak of a water wheel. He stands in the sun for a moment, the staff in his right hand, the shadow of the great pylon falling long across the avenue, and the land of Egypt lies around him heavy and old and entirely sure of itself. This is only the beginning. The long contest has begun. It is not a contest of strength. It never was. It is something slower and stranger than that. A patient asking, returned to again and again, against a refusal that has the whole weight of an ancient kingdom behind it. The brothers walk together back through the city, past the mud-walled houses and the grain stores and the canal-side markets, and the city goes about its ancient business around them, unhurried, unaware that something has shifted. The land lies under the afternoon sun the same as it ever was, gold and heavy and still. But the asking has begun. The door, once knocked upon, stays knocked upon. Evening comes over the riverland slowly and with great beauty, the sky going from blue to gold to rose to a deep green above the western desert, the Nile flashing bronze in the last light, the ibises settling in the reed beds with small splashing sounds. The two brothers find a quiet place and the day closes around them. The refusal is real. The weight on the people is real. And yet the man who sat for 40 years in the desert tending another man's flocks has learned something about patience, about how long a thing can take, and how the waiting itself is part of the journey, and how morning always, in the end, comes back around. In the days that follow, a quiet change begins to move through Egypt like the first slow turning of a season. The Nile, that great, bright, restless river, the life and the breath of the whole land, begins to deepen in color, darkening from its clear greenish blue to something slower, heavier, the color of deep red clay or old wine left too long in the jar. It happens the way a sunset changes the water, gradually, softly, until you look up and the river you knew is simply not the river you are seeing now. Fishermen who have worked these banks since boyhood stand at the water's edge and look out at it without casting their nets. The boats are drawn up on the muddy shore and left there, rocking very gently on the strange dark current. Along the reed beds, where the water used to flicker silver with life, there is only the slow moving of the current, heavy and brown, and above it the pale haze of the sky, and the silence that settles when a familiar sound simply stops, and you do not notice it stopping until the quiet is already complete. Moses and Aaron return to the palace in the early morning, when the light is still low and golden over the lotus column halls, and again they ask, with the same patience that a stone has when the water runs over it, that the people be allowed to go. The answer comes back the same: no. It has the quality of a wall, that answer. Not angry, not reasoned, simply solid. And so Moses turns and walks back out through the great pylons into the brightening day, and the land waits, and the change waits with it. Then, on a quiet evening when the air is warm and smells of mud and green growing things, the pools along the river's edge begin to fill with frogs. Not one or two, the way a summer evening will always hold a frog's voice somewhere in the reeds, but many. Their soft churring rising from every ditch and every still water, from the irrigation channels that thread through the grain fields, from the ornamental pools in the garden courtyards of the great houses, a constant low music everywhere at once. The sound of them is not frightening, it is simply everywhere, filling every room, every corner, every silence, so that the world of Egypt becomes a world of that one soft sound. A churring, a murmuring, a patient chorus from the darkness under every stone and every reed clump, as though the land itself had found a voice and was simply saying, very quietly and without stopping, something is different now, something has changed, something is waiting to change further still. And the stars come out over the fields and the frogs go on. Again the brothers return to the palace, and again they ask, and again the answer is no. There is something almost sad about the rhythm of it, the asking and the refusal, the asking and the refusal, like a door that will not open no matter how gently you lay your hand against it. And so they turn once more and walk out into the hazy morning, and the story moves forward at its own slow pace, the way the Nile moves, unhurried, vast, carrying everything with it, whether it's refused or not. Then the dust comes. It rises not from any storm on the horizon, but from the ground itself. A fine, reddish gold dust, softer than sand, lighter than silt, lifting into the air across the whole breadth of the land, settling on windowsills and on the broad leaves of the sycamore figs, drifting along the edges of roads and market squares, coating every surface with a thin layer of something soft and strange. The light through it is gentler than usual, diffused and warm, as though the whole country were seen through a length of fine linen. People move through the dust-soft streets more slowly, the way one moves through a place that has become unfamiliar. There is a dreamlike quality to the days now, the ordinary sights of Egypt still present, the same columns and canals and grain warehouses and palm groves, but all of it slightly softened, slightly veiled, as though the world were a painting that someone had breathed on very gently, and the colors had blurred and run together at the edges. Just enough to make you uncertain for a moment of what you were looking at. The palace receives them again, and again the answer is no. Moses does not argue. He does not raise his voice. He speaks his words plainly, as a man who has been told the same thing many times and has decided to go on asking anyway, because the asking is the work he has been given, and the answering is not his to compel. He carries the staff, and he stands and he speaks, and then he walks back through the haze into the afternoon, and behind him the palace doors close, and the dust drifts slowly in the warm, still air. Now over the fields where the cattle graze, those broad, flat fields that spread along the Nile's western margin, green and lush with clover and sedge, a heaviness settles. The cattle stand very still. They do not low or move from where they are. They simply stand, patient and quiet, their great dark eyes half closed, the grass untouched beneath their hooves. The herdsmen walk among them and speak to them softly, and the cattle do not stir. The fields have a muffled quality, the way a field sounds after snow, hushed and close, all the usual rustling gone. There is no suffering in this stillness. It is simply strange, the way a forest goes quiet before a storm, every creature holding its breath, every leaf going motionless on the branch. The whole plain has the quality of a painting of itself, accurate in every detail, perfectly rendered, and yet somehow without the particular aliveness that makes a field and not a picture of one. The herdsman sits on the low bank of an irrigation ditch and watches his cattle standing in the distance, and does not know what to make of the afternoon. And once more the asking, and once more the no. The rhythm of it has become almost its own kind of weather by now, a regular, recurring thing, like the tide, like the rising of the Nile each year, returning whether it is wanted or not. Moses goes back and he asks, and the word comes back, no. And the land keeps changing softly and without violence, the way a season changes when you are not watching. You look up one afternoon, and the light is different, and you cannot say exactly when it shifted. Then comes a morning when the sky does not brighten the way it should. The sun rises. You know it has risen because the horizon line goes from black to gray to a dim and burnished copper. But the light does not come down into the streets and the fields the way it usually does. It stays above, caught in something, and below it the land rests in a warm and sourceless dimness, like the light inside a room when all the shutters are drawn and only the faintest thread of day comes through the cracks. For 3 days the land lives in this soft, deep dimness, not the terror of a storm's darkness, nothing cold or fierce in it, but a warm, close, honeyed kind of dark, like being inside the hour just before dawn for a long, long time. Lamps are lit in the middle of the afternoon. Children play by lamplight in the courtyards. The birds are quiet. The shadows that usually travel across the walls and floors as the sun moves do not come. The whole land breathes slowly and waits in the dim, warm hush of it. And when the third day passes and the sky slowly brightens again to its ordinary blue, blinking back into itself as though from a long sleep, the land that comes back into the light looks the same as before. The palms, the fields, the river, the long limestone cliffs. And yet the people who move through it carry something in them now, a knowledge that the ordinary world can grow strange, that the familiar can change without warning, that the land they have always known is not quite as fixed and permanent as it seemed before all this began. And still he goes back, and still he asks. And there is something in Moses that the years in the desert have made very hard to wear down, a quality of stillness under pressure, a rootedness, the way the deep desert tamarisk tree endures the hot wind without bending because its roots have gone so far down into the rock that there is nothing left for the wind to take. He was not always this still. He was once a young man who acted quickly and with his hands. But the desert changes a person, and the long waiting changes a person, and here he is. The strange signs have been moving through the land like waves on still water, each one reaching its edge and subsiding, and then another beginning, one after another, each one a little softer and more dreamlike than a terrible thing should be, as though the land were being asked a long question in a language that is not words but weather, not speech but change, not force but a patient, gentle, unanswerable insistence. And each time the answer comes back, no, and each time something new settles over the fields and the sky and the slow brown river. There is hail, but soft in the telling, soft in the memory of it, a white curtain of it falling across the fields at dusk, drumming on the broad leaves of the flax, cold and clean, the air smelling of wet stone and rain for the first time in months. The sky above it is a bruised greenish purple, the color the sky goes in the deep desert just before a rare storm, and the sound of the hail on the mud brick walls is like a low continuous drumming, steady and without malice, the sound of weather doing what weather does. And still the people wait. The people for whom all of this is being asked, the people who have lived for so long in the shadow of Egypt's great weight, in the brick fields and the storehouses and the long exhausted evenings, they wait with a patience that has been made out of long necessity. They watch the sky change. They listen to the land grow strange. They speak quietly to one another in the evenings in the lamplight, and in the mornings they look out at the altered world, and they wait for the answer to change. Then the locusts come on a wind from the east, not as a terror but as a sound, a low hum on the horizon that builds slowly through the morning until the sky to the east has gone a soft, shifting amber brown, the color of a sandstorm coming, and the light through it falls across the fields like late afternoon, although it is still before noon. They settle on the remaining crops and the green things, and the air fills with the dry, papery rustle of them, like the turning of 1,000 pages, like dry reeds moving together in a slow current. And after the locusts, a wind comes from the west and carries them back out over the sea, and the land is left bare and very quiet, the stripped fields pale under the wide sky, the air clean after their passing. And still the answer has not come, and still the land waits in its strangeness, and still Moses and his brother rise each morning and carry their patient, asking back through the great gates of the palace, asking for the one thing that does not change. Let them go. Let them go. The land holds its breath, and something is about to give way at last. And then the darkness came. Not the quick darkness of a passing cloud, not the brief shadow of evening arriving in its ordinary way, but a deep, soft, enormous dark that settled over the land like a great hand drawing a curtain slowly across the sky. It came in the middle of the day, and it did not lift. The Nile grew dim, its wide surface barely catching the light of the small lamps that appeared now in every doorway, every window, tiny flames trembling in the hushed air. The whole broad kingdom went quiet under it, as though the land itself had grown drowsy. For 3 days the darkness held, not a harsh or terrible dark, but something softer than that, a dimming of the whole world, as though the sun had drawn its brightness inward and was resting. The great pylons of the temples stood in it, their carved faces unreadable, their stone cool to the touch. The palm groves along the river's edge were still, their fronds hanging without sound. The cattle stood quietly in the fields, heads low. A heron paused on a muddy bank and did not move. Even the wind had quieted, and the air held a close, almost sleepy warmth. Inside the houses, people sat with their small clay lamps burning, listening to the silence. The lamplight made warm gold pools on the mud brick walls, on the faces of children curled against their mothers, on the painted jars of grain set in the corners. Outside, the streets were empty, or nearly so. Here and there, a sandaled foot moving softly through the warm dark, the sound of it quick and then gone. It was a darkness you could almost rest in, soft as cloth, deep as still water, and across all of it the quiet held, and the bright kingdom waited, and the long asking was not yet answered. Moses stood at the edge of the dimmed city and felt the darkness around him like a held breath. He had carried the asking for so long now, through the slow mornings and the long afternoons, through all the days of strangeness that had moved across the land like dreams one after another. And still he carried it. He turned toward the palace at the heart of the dimmed city, its great walls barely visible in the lamp-softened gloom, its gates tall and silent. His sandals were worn smooth by now from all the going and returning. His staff was warm in his hand. He went in. And once more he stood in the Hall of Columns, where the lotus capitals rose up into the dimness above him, where the torches along the walls threw long warm light over the painted stone, where the air smelled of incense and of old stone and of something ancient and patient that had lived in these walls for longer than any man could reckon. He made the asking again, in the same words he had always used, quiet and clear as water. Let them go. And in the dimness of the great hall, the answer came back as it always had, not yet, not yet. He walked back out through the great gates, and the darkness was still there, wrapped around the city like a gentle sleep that would not end. Aaron was waiting for him in the shadow of a wall, his white robe catching the small light of a nearby lamp. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They had been through this long passage together, the long road back from Midian, the first day at the palace, every morning since, each sign and each return and each refusal. There was a great patience between them now, worn smooth as river stone, quiet and enduring. They stood in the warm dark and rested. On the third day, the darkness lifted. It drew back the way it had come. Slowly, softly, the light returning first as a faint gray at the horizon, then as a pale gold washing gently over the rooftops and the river and the wide fields lying still. The people of the land stepped out of their doors and looked at the sky and felt the sun on their faces again. The birds began once more from the trees along the river. The Nile caught the light and held it in its moving surface. And the land breathed again, slow and wondering into the ordinary day, but nothing felt the same as it had before the dark. There were long days after that, ordinary-seeming days, when the sun moved across the sky in its familiar arc and the river ran its familiar brown and the market sounds drifted from the town. But the strangeness had not gone. It had only settled deeper, become part of the feel of the air, the weight of each afternoon. Moses moved through these days quietly, as he had moved through every day of the long contest, waiting, listening, returning each morning to the palace with the same asking, feeling the one unanswered thing like a stone carried inside the chest. And somewhere in the unseen country of that long waiting, something was shifting at last. It is told that Moses went once more through the great gates of the palace, that he stood once more in the lamp-warm hall, under the lotus columns, before the carved stone gods of Egypt in their ancient dignity, that he made the asking one final time, clear and unchanged as it had always been. And it is told that something in the air of that hall was different now, a stillness deeper than any that had come before. A sense of great weight gathered in the painted shadows overhead, as though the long road of the asking had reached at last the place where the road runs out. He spoke. He turned. He walked back out into the light. What came upon the land that night cannot be told clearly, and this story does not try to tell it. The old accounts say only that a great stillness gathered as the sun went down, that the stars came out one by one in a sky very clear and very high, and that something moved through the dark, something the story names only as a great grief, a great stillness passing over the land. It does not dwell there. It does not open that door. It says only, the land was very still, and the dark was very deep, and a sorrow passed through Egypt in the night, and the long refusing was at last at an end. But this story's eyes are elsewhere. They are with the people in their lamplit houses, in the warm gold of the oil lamps, in the smell of the unleavened bread baking quickly on the hot stone, in the sound of sandals being laced, of bundles being bound, of children lifted and held. The meal set on the low table was simple and good, bread without leaven, herbs whose scent was sharp and clean in the warm room, roasted meat, and the lamp burning steadily above it all. They ate standing, because the old story says they did. Standing with their cloaks already gathered, their staffs already in their hands, they were almost gone. Above the doorways of these houses, the marks were visible in the lamplight from outside. A careful stripe of color along the lintel and the posts, painted in haste by hands that knew the weight of what they were doing, and yet did it quietly, without theater or ceremony, with the deliberate calm of people who have prepared themselves for something long and enormous and real. From the narrow lane outside, those marked doorways glowed softly, warm and unmistakable in the dark. The oil light seeping through the cracks around the door frames, the lintel above each one bearing its quiet sign. A row of warm lights in the deep Egyptian night. Inside, the children slept, or almost slept, nestled against bundles and cloaks, their breathing soft and even in the lamp-warm rooms. The mothers moved quietly, wrapping the last of the bread in cloth, tucking it into the bundle at their hip. The fathers stood near the doors, staffs in hand, listening to the dark outside. There was no fear in these rooms, or if there was, it had been folded away for later. What filled the rooms now was something older and quieter than fear, a gathered readiness, a sense of standing at the edge of a long-awaited thing. The night was warm, the lamps burned steadily, the bread was wrapped and ready. And then, very quietly, the word moved through the houses. It passed from door to door like a lamp being lit from another lamp, a hand tapping softly on a wall, a low voice carrying the single word down the lane, then the next lane, then the next. The great night of leaving had come. Door after door opened into the dark. The people of the leaving came out into the lanes and streets with their bundles and their children and their few beloved animals. Goats and donkeys stepping soft on the packed earth, the bells around their necks muffled with cloth, so the sound was only a faint, soft chime, hardly louder than a heartbeat. Moses stood in the open air and watched them come. They came from every quarter of the city and from the towns beyond, from the brick fields and the low houses along the river, from the flat land east of the delta where the labor gangs had slept beneath the stars. They came in families, in clusters, in long, quiet streams that joined together like water joining water. Unhurried, deliberate, each person carrying what they could, each face turned in the same direction. The cool night air moved gently over them. Above, the stars were extraordinary, bright and close and thick, the whole sky alight with them, a river of light overhead to match the river of people below. looked up at the stars with wide, quiet eyes, and behind them, from somewhere in the dark city they were leaving, no sound came. The city was still. Egypt was very still. The cool night air smelled of dust and of the river behind them and of the sweet green hay smell of the goats, and underneath all of it, something sharp and clear, the smell of freedom at the very start of its first road. They did not hurry. That is the thing that stays in the mind when the story is told softly and slowly, the way it is meant to be told. They did not run. They walked. They walked the way people walk when they have been waiting for something so long that when it finally comes, they can only move through it carefully, holding each moment of it, not wanting to break its stillness with haste. The land they were crossing was the land they had known all their lives. Its flat, dark fields, its irrigation ditches, its reed-bordered paths between the marshes. They crossed it in the dark and said goodbye to it without saying a word, and kept walking. The marked doorways stood empty now, in the lane behind them, their lamps still burning. No one had stopped to snuff them out. The warm light spilled from each one into the empty street, each doorway a small square of gold in the enormous dark, each lamp still casting its patient circle on the threshold stones. They would burn through what remained of their oil, and then they would go out one by one, and the lane would be dark, and the houses would be empty, and the only light left would be the stars. But that was later. For now, the lamps still burned, and the doorways glowed, and the leaving was real. The old story says that a great grief passed over Egypt that night, and the story names it and then moves on, the way a river names a stone at its bed and then flows quietly over it. Something enormous and sorrowful entered the dark of Egypt in the long hours before dawn, and it is left there, unnamed and unshown, held at the furthest distance the telling allows. What the story brings its eyes back to is the sound of the people walking. The soft fall of sandals on dry ground, the creak of a laden donkey, the murmur of a child's voice asking something and being answered in a low and tender tone. The walking, the night, the stars above, and the path ahead. And so the night of leaving began to open into the long road ahead. The last lamps in the houses behind them burned lower and lower, and the stars wheeled slowly overhead. And the people walked on into the dark, between the land they had known and the land they were going toward. The night air was cool on their faces now, the dry, clean coolness of the open desert beginning to edge out the warm, damp closeness of the delta. Far ahead, the sky held the very first hint of what might, in a few more hours, become the palest gray of a new day. The long night was not yet over, but the long captivity was, and in every house that night, the same quiet scene was being held. A lamp burning low and orange on a mud brick shelf, a cloth spread on the floor or a low table, and on it food prepared in haste and eaten standing, bread baked flat and without leaven because there had been no time to let it rise and wait, bitter herbs laid alongside, meat roasted over a small quick fire and eaten before it cooled. The smell of it filled each room. Warm bread and wood smoke and the faint sharpness of the herbs, and the people ate quickly, tenderly, their hands remembering each other in the lamplight. They ate, the old story says, with their sandals already fastened to their feet. They held their walking staffs in their hands as they ate, or leaned them against the wall within easy reach, because tonight was not a night for lingering at the table. Tonight they would eat and rise. Tonight every bite was already a step on the road. The sandals were dusty, the straps worn soft from long use, and they pressed lightly on the floor as the people shifted their weight and glanced toward the door. And the food was warm in their hands, and the night waited outside, enormous and quiet. The children had been wrapped in their travel cloaks. The littlest ones were bundled close against their mother's shoulders, their faces soft and drowsy in the warm light, not yet understanding the weight of the hour, only feeling the warmth of arms around them and the smell of bread in the air. Older children watched with wide, quiet eyes, sensing the unusual stillness of the adults, the way the grown-ups moved without wasted motion, checking bundles, tucking bread still warm into cloth, lifting things and setting them down and lifting them again. It was not fear in that stillness, it was readiness. The bundles had been packed earlier, cloth tied over jars of grain, small tools wrapped in linen, a few precious things folded carefully inside. There was not much. There could not be much, for they would carry it all on their backs and on the backs of the animals, and the road ahead was long and unknown. But the flat bread they had baked, they wrapped still warm in cloth and tucked at the top of the bundles, because they knew they would be hungry before morning, and there would be no fire to stop and make, not for a long while, not until the dark of Egypt was behind them and something new had opened ahead. The doorways had been marked. Earlier in the evening, before the meal was set and the lamps lit against the dark, each household had made its mark on the lintel and the 2 posts of the door. A mark that said, "Here, here is this family, here is this house, let this house be known." And now in the late darkness, those marks were invisible to anyone passing in the street, visible only to those who knew to look. A quiet sign between the lamplit interior and the vast night beyond the threshold. The marked door frames glowed faintly from the lamplight spilling through. Dark wood, warm orange light, the cool dark lane beyond. Outside, the land was very still. The night lay over Egypt, enormous and deep, and a great stillness and a great grief passed over the land in the dark, a sorrow that was not theirs to carry, a weight that settled on houses not marked, on streets they would not walk again. They heard nothing but the low murmur of their own households, the occasional soft sound of an animal shifting in the dark. And then, quietly, in house after house, the lamp was lifted, the bundle was shouldered, a child was gathered close, and the family turned toward the door. The meal was finished, the night was ready. They went out into the dark. One household, then another down the lane. A soft sound of footsteps on packed earth, the rustle of cloth, the low breath of animals being led from their pens. In the cool night air, the lamplight from the doorways made warm rectangles on the ground that each family stepped through as they left, stepping from the lit into the dark, from the inside into the open. The air was cool and still and smelled of river mud and dust and the far-off clean scent of the open desert. They did not run. They walked. They walked quietly, with great purpose, into the enormous dark. The lanes of the settlement opened into wider paths, and the wider paths opened into the roads that led eastward and out. And onto these roads, from every lane and every quarter, the people were coming. Quietly and steadily, family joining family, neighbor joining neighbor, until the road east of the settlement was a long, slow river of movement in the dark. Flocks of sheep and goats moved among them, their hooves soft on the ground, their breath making small pale clouds in the cool air. Donkeys carried the heaviest bundles, their heads lowered patiently. The great leaving had begun, and it had begun not with a shout, but with a murmur, a shuffle, a gathering. Here and there a lamp was carried, a small cupped flame moving through the dark, bobbing gently with its bearer's walking pace, casting a little warm circle on the legs and bundles closest to it before the dark swallowed the rest. The stars overhead were very bright. Away from the lamplight of the settlement, the sky opened out enormous and close. the way a sky only can when a great plain stretches out beneath it, and there is nothing to break the line between the earth and the heavens. The stars turned slowly overhead, and the people walked beneath them steadily, carrying their bread and their animals and their children and everything they owned. Among the things they carried, wrapped carefully, borne with great deliberateness through the dark, were the bones of Joseph. The old story says this plainly and tenderly. Joseph, who had been carried down to Egypt so long ago, who had asked, at the end of his long and astonishing life, that when his people one day left this land, they would not leave him behind. And so he traveled with them now, wrapped in cloth, carried in careful arms, going home at last, his long-ago promise made whole in the dark. It was a quiet thing, the carrying of bones in the night, and a very old kind of faithfulness. The city's lamps were falling away behind them. Looking back, and most did not look back, but some did, once briefly, they could see the warm, scattered lights of the settlement receding into the dark, a small, warm constellation of orange and gold against the greater dark of the land. The lamps were small, the dark was vast, and with every step the lamps grew smaller, and the dark of the open country grew wider and more present, and the cool air became cleaner, carrying less smoke and less river, and more of the dry openness that lay east of the delta. Each step was a step further from the only life most of them had ever known. The staffs tapped the ground with a quiet, steady rhythm, wood on packed earth, again and again, the oldest sound of a people walking. The flocks moved with them unhurried, the animals sensing in some patient way that this was simply where their people were going, and so they went. A sheep here, a goat there, the heavier animals with their deep, unhurried breathing. The children who were old enough to walk held onto the hands of those beside them and walked without asking to be carried, as though they too understood that this was a night for walking. The road stretched ahead into the dark, and the people walked on, and the night received them. There was, the old story notes, no bread for the journey except the flat, unleavened bread they had baked in haste and carried warm out of their houses. There had been no time for leavened bread, no time to mix and cover and wait through the hours of rising, and so they carried what they had, bread as simple and plain as bread can be, pressed flat and baked quickly over a fire that was already being put out, still warm against the cloth that wrapped it. It would sustain them. Bread made in haste and carried out of a dark land has its own kind of richness, its own particular taste, the taste of a road opened, of a leaving that was also a beginning. Moses was among them. He walked as one who had been preparing for this night, through all the long, hard work of the weeks behind him, through every audience with Pharaoh, through every sign laid upon the land, through every time the great house had said no, and then relented, and then hardened again. All of that was behind him now. He walked with his staff, the same worn staff he had carried through the years of shepherding in Midian, the staff that had struck water and been held over signs. He walked east with his people, and the night was cool around him, and the stars were turning, and the land of Egypt was letting them go. Aaron walked beside him, his brother, who had stood with him in all those audience chambers, who had spoken when the words were difficult, who had waited with him through the long signs. And Miriam was among the people, his sister, who had stood at the edge of the river as a small girl and watched a basket float among the reeds, who had run to find a nurse when the princess lifted a crying child from the water. They were old now, all three of them. Old in the way that people are old who have walked a long road. But they were walking. They were walking free under the stars, and the night air was cool on their faces. The green riverland was sinking behind them, the Nile's broad green belt, the marshes and papyrus beds, the dark, rich fields that flooded each year and gave the land its life. The soil underfoot was changing slowly, the dark loam of the delta giving way to something harder and more pale, the earth drying as the road led away from the river. The smell of the river, that rich, warm, muddy smell that had been the smell of their whole lives, was thinning in the air behind them. Ahead, the night smelled of cooler things, dust and stone, and the dry, clean breath of the open land that lay between the river and the sea. Hour by hour they moved through the dark, and the line stretched long and slow across the plain, a long, soft river of people moving eastward, neither hurried nor slow, simply steady. The sound of it was very particular, the low murmur of voices speaking quietly to children, to animals, to one another, the soft percussion of hooves and sandals and staffs on the ground, the occasional creak of a load being shifted, a bundle resettled. Underneath all of it, a hush, the great quiet of a vast night, and a great people held inside it, moving. There was no shouting, there was no singing, not yet. There was only the walking and the dark and the stars and the cool, clean air. Some among them were very old, and some were very young, and some had known only the mud brick houses and the heavy work of the fields and the long years of labor, and had never in their lives walked this road, had never been this far east, had never felt this particular coolness on their faces, or seen the sky this wide and unbroken overhead. For them, the air itself was new. Even the night was different out here, further from the river, a drier darkness, a cleaner dark, with a smell of stone and distance that the delta never had. They walked into it, and it received them, and the sky was very wide, and the stars were very close. The last lights of the city were long gone behind them now. The plain was dark, and the road was pale, and the stars were the only light, and the people moved by starlight, which is a very gentle light, old and unhurried and enormous, asking nothing. They were not yet at the sea. They were not yet in the wilderness. They were in the in-between, the dark between the land they had known and the land they were going toward. The night air was cool on their faces, the dry, clean coolness of the open desert beginning to edge out the warm, damp closeness of the delta. Far ahead, the sky held the very first hint of what might, in a few more hours, become the palest gray of a new day. The long night was not yet over, but the long captivity was. And in every bundle that rocked gently on a shoulder, in every flat loaf of bread still faintly warm against the cloth that held it, in every small child drowsing against a parent's chest as the miles passed quietly beneath the sandaled feet, there was a kind of peace that had not been there before. The peace of a door that has opened after a very long wait, and a people stepping through it, not into certainty, not into ease, but into the open, into the clean and enormous dark, into the unhurried stars, into the road that was theirs now to walk. It is enough for now to rest in the walking. They walked through the night and through the next day, and when the word came that the sea lay ahead, the people moved down toward the water in the last hours of darkness, a long, soft, shuffling line of sandaled feet and tired flocks, of small children carried sleeping against shoulders, of bundles and tent poles and the quiet breathing of animals. The moon was up, large and unhurried, laying a broad, pale road across the face of the water. The sea was vast and very still, and the night around it was calm. The shore stretched wide in both directions, the sand pale and cold underfoot, the smell of salt thick in the air, and the sound of the water against the strand a low, unhurried murmur, a sound that had no urgency in it, only the old patient rhythm of a sea that had been there long before any of them and would remain long after. The people gathered close together, flocks folding into themselves for warmth, the smaller fires shielded against the wind, the stars overhead, brilliant and indifferent to anything so small as a people at the edge of the water. And somewhere behind them, far off in the dark, there was a sound, distant, indistinct, like something moving through the night along the road they had come by. It did not grow louder. It stayed where it was, far back, muffled by the dark and the miles, until even that faint sound began to thin and soften and be swallowed by the wind coming off the water. The people stood at the sea's edge and did not look back for long. The water was ahead of them, wide and silver and still, and the moon moved slowly overhead. Then the wind began. It came from the east, low at first, a cool breath across the face of the water that stirred the loose ends of cloth and sent a ripple through the flock and lifted the hair of the children asleep at their mothers' sides. It carried the smell of deep water and open distance, of places no sandaled foot had ever touched. It was not a frightening wind. It was steady and purposeful, the way that certain things are purposeful, without making any noise about it. And it pressed against the surface of the sea with a great, patient, unhurrying hand. Through the long hours of the night the wind blew, and the sea began very slowly to change. It is told that the waters drew back, not all at once, not with any sound of violence, but gradually, the way that a tide retreats at its own slow pace, leaving the dark, wet sand behind. The sea pulled away from itself, the surface drawing in from the edges, the water pulling back and back, the moonlight catching each retreating wave as it went. And where the water had been, there was sand, there was ground. A path began to open through the dark. The walls of water stood on either side, dark and still and very quiet, like two great curtains of deep sea that had simply decided to remain upright, patient as stone, holding themselves apart so that the ground between them lay open and pale in the moonlight. The sand of the seabed was damp and firm underfoot, and marked with the small, shallow impressions of shells and the faint ribs left by ancient currents, a floor that had never known the weight of a human step. Now waiting beneath the open sky, beneath the cold and brilliant stars. Moses went first, the old story says, a single figure walking out onto the dry ground, the wind still steady at his back, the walls of water standing quietly on either hand, close enough that the cold breath of the deep came off them in a slow, even exhalation, damp and clean. He did not run. He walked, the way a man walks when he has been walking a long time and has learned that the road beneath him will hold. And behind him, gently, the people began to follow. First one, then another, then the whole long, patient river of them, moving onto the dry ground. They crossed in a long, quiet line, people and flocks and donkeys and the bundles of everything they carried out of Egypt. The sound of their crossing was a soft sound, feet on damp sand, the breath of animals, a child murmuring half awake, the low, persuasive voice of a shepherd moving a reluctant goat forward onto ground it had not expected. The walls of water on either side made no sound at all. They simply stood, dark and enormous and still, the moonlight catching their upper edges in a faint silver trembling, as though they too were holding their breath. Above them, the stars were extraordinary, undimmed by anything, blazing in the cold night air over the open sea, so bright that the path between the waters was lit not only by the moon, but by all of them together, a vast soft canopy of light over a people walking through the middle of the sea as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. And perhaps, after all they had seen and all they had walked through, it almost was another step on a road that had asked them to trust it one strange turning at a time, and had each time held. The crossing took the last hours of the night. Slowly the far shore grew nearer, a dark line rising out of the water ahead, its low dunes silvered by the moon, a fringe of coarse grass catching the wind. The first of them stepped up onto the far shore in the deep of the night, the sand shifting softly under feet that had only known Egyptian ground until now. They climbed a little way up the beach and stood and waited and watched the long line still crossing behind them. The darkness full of the quiet sounds of a people on the move, unhurried, steady, step by step. We follow them now across those last quiet steps to the far side. When the last of the flocks had climbed the bank and the last pair of sandals had left the dry seabed behind, the wind shifted. It was a small thing, that shift. A change in the pressure of the air, a turning of the current over the water, and then, quietly, gently, the sea returned to itself. The waters drew back together the way that a breath is slowly let out, without violence, without sound that anyone would describe as frightening, only the long, deep sigh of the sea folding over the ground it had opened. The sea closed softly behind them, and the morning was still. There is a gentleness in that sentence that the old story carries like something cupped in two careful hands. The sea closed softly, and the morning was still. What had been behind them was simply gone, the way that a dream is gone when you open your eyes and find the room full of ordinary light. The unseen had gone before them and had made a way, as it had always made a way, through the dark, through the water, through the night that had asked everything of them and then opened into morning. The dawn came in slowly over the water. First a thinning of the dark in the east, then a pale gray that warmed by degrees into the color of shallow water over sand, then a long band of rose and gold along the horizon that laid itself across the face of the sea and made the whole surface glow like something burnished. The people on the far shore sat or stood or lay down, watching the light come. Some of them had not slept. Some of them wept, quietly, for reasons they could not entirely have named. The sea before them was empty and beautiful and absolutely still. The flocks grazed on the coarse shore grass, unbothered, pulling at the stiff blades with the same patient indifference they had always shown toward whatever strange place the day had brought them. Donkeys folded their legs and lowered themselves to rest. Children who had been carried through the night were set down gently onto the sand and promptly curled into sleep, their small faces slack and peaceful, the long journey folded into their breathing. The sound of the sea was here a gentle one, small waves against the strand, the kind of sound a person could sleep to, easily without trying. Miriam, who had watched her brother's basket rock in the reeds of the Nile so many years ago, who had stood at the edge of the papyrus and watched and waited with a child's enormous careful patience, was here now, on this far shore in the early light. She took up a small drum, the old story tells us, and the sound of it was a bright and quiet sound, not loud, just steady, the way a heartbeat is steady after a long fear has finally passed. Others joined in softly, voices low in the morning air, the music less a celebration than a breathing out, a letting go. The sea lay behind them now, wide and silver and quiet. There was nothing on it, no sound from the direction they had come, no shape on the water, no echo of the night that had carried so much fear in it for so long. The morning held only what mornings hold, light and air and the smell of salt and the sound of small waves, and a people sitting on the sand in the early warmth, beginning very slowly to understand that they had crossed. That the other side of the impossible was simply here, as ordinary as sand, as ordinary as the light. And Moses stood a little apart, as he often stood, a single figure on the beach, looking out over the water, the light coming up around him, the wind in the cloth at his back. He had been a child in a basket on this same river once. He had been a prince in a house of stone and gold. He had been a shepherd on the far side of a different silence, watching fires burn in the desert night. And now he was this, a man on the far shore of the sea, with the road ahead of him, still long, still unknown, still asking to be walked. Behind him, Egypt was gone, not with violence, not with rancor, but simply gone the way that a night goes when the sun rises, replaced by light and by the open country ahead. The great land of the Nile, with its temples and its palms and its lotus column halls and the slow green of the river at evening, all of it lay on the other side of the water now, in the past, in its own ancient life. And ahead of them, somewhere beyond the stone and the sand and the long, uncharted miles of wilderness, was the land they had been promised, the land they were walking toward. Slowly the people rose. Flocks were gathered, loads were resettled onto shoulders and onto the patient backs of animals, and the long line began to form again. The same long line it had been since the night of leaving, unhurried, steady, foot after foot. The shore fell away behind them as they turned inland, and the road rose into the first low hills of the wilderness, stone and ochre and pale sky, the morning air still cool, the sun not yet high. The sea was behind them now, and the land ahead, and between the two, the road. And they walked. The sea, left behind, lay still and silver in the growing light, its surface unmarked, its water calm, its horizon empty and clean. The sound of it faded as they moved inland, first to a murmur, then to a whisper, then to nothing at all, replaced by the crunch of stone underfoot, and the dry breath of the open country, and the high, clear silence of the wilderness morning. And if someone had looked back from the first ridge, and perhaps someone did, what they would have seen was only light on water and light on sand, and the long, beautiful, empty sea resting. It is enough for now to rest here, at the edge of the morning, at the far side of the water, where the danger has passed and the road ahead is open and unhurried, and the sea behind lies quiet as a field at rest, and the light on the water is the softest light there is, the light that comes after a long night and asks nothing of anyone, only that they breathe and be still and begin again. We go with them now into the wilderness. Beyond the shore, the land opens wide and red and still, a country of stone and silence, of low thorn scrub and far red ridges, of sky so enormous and so pale it seems to hold the whole of the world inside it. The sand underfoot is warm already in the early morning, and the air carries the faint dry scent of rock and sage, and somewhere far away a single bird calls once, and then is quiet. This is the wilderness of Sinai, ancient and vast and unhurried, and it waits for them the way wide places always wait, without impatience, without end. They move in a long, slow line, these people and their animals and their few carried things, donkeys and goats and small flocks of sheep picking their way among the stones, the sound of their going a soft shuffle and a low bleating that drifts away into the open air and is absorbed by all that space. There are children carried on shoulders, and old men leaning on walking sticks, and women with bundles wrapped in cloth, and all of them moving together through this vast red country, following the road that opens in front of them and closes behind them like a dream. And above them, from the first day of the wilderness, there is something else. A presence that the old story describes as a tall pillar of cloud, rising from the ground like smoke from a holy fire, white and slow and immense against the blue. It moves when they move, and when it is still they make their camp, and when it lifts again they take up their things and follow. The cloud does not speak and does not command. It only goes before them, quietly, the way a lamp carried ahead of a traveler lights each step as it comes, no more, no less. The days are long and very bright in the wilderness, the sun climbing high above the red plateaus and flooding every hollow and gully with a fierce white light, and the heat lies heavy on the stones by midday like a second silence pressed on top of the first. But the cloud is there, vast and white, and in its shadow the air is cooler, and the people walk on through the afternoon, the scrub brushing soft against their robes, the sand still warm beneath their sandals, following the slow cloud that has no hurry at all, only direction. And at night the cloud changes. The old story says that when the sun goes down and the darkness comes on over the wilderness, that cold, profound, star-crowded desert darkness, the pillar does not disappear but becomes instead a soft, warm glow of fire, resting over the camp like an ember, like a hearth seen from across a field. It is not blinding, not alarming, it is only warm, The tents are dark and close around it, and the animals are quiet, and the fire glows on, steady and unhurried, and the people sleep beneath its light as children sleep beside a lamp left burning for them. There are days when the land grows very dry, and the water carried in clay jars and animal skin sacks runs low, and the people's mouths are parched and the animals walk with their heads down. The old story holds this tenderly, without drama. It is simply the wilderness being what it is, a wide and thirsty country. And then in the telling, water is found or made sweet where it was bitter, a dark brackish pool at the foot of a pale limestone cliff, and the water runs clear and cool again, and the animals drink deep, and the sound of their drinking is one of the quietest, most peaceful sounds there is. And there is another time, the old story tells it softly, when the water has run out entirely, and the land around them is bare red rock and nothing else. And Moses strikes the face of the rock with his staff, and from the stone there comes a sound like a deep breath, and then water, running bright and thin at first, and then wider, cool and clean over the red surface of the rock, filling the hollows, running down between the stones. The people come forward and kneel to drink, and the animals press close, and the water runs on freely as if it had always been there, only waiting. And hunger, too, the wilderness holds, days when the provisions carried out of Egypt have grown thin, when the bread is gone and the stores are light and the land offers nothing but stone and sky. The old story does not linger in the want. It only notes it and moves quietly on to the provision. Each evening a small and gentle thing, a soft wind over the camp, the faint sound of wings in the dusk, and in the morning something new on the ground, pale and fine as frost, scattered across the desert floor in the first gray light, a faint sweetness in the air above it, a smell of dew, and something almost like bread. Manna, they call it, which means in the old tongue something like "what is this?" For it is a thing none of them have seen before, a fine, pale, bread-like dew that lies on the ground each morning fresh, that can be gathered in the hands and carried in a bowl and eaten, and that tastes of something mild and sweet and nourishing. It comes every morning when the dew comes, and by midday when the sun is high and the air grows hot, it is gone. And so each dawn the people go out quietly into the pale morning light before the heat and gather it, enough for the day, no more, no less. And this becomes their rhythm, this going out at dawn and gathering and returning. There is something almost meditative about that morning gathering, the cool air that has not yet lost its night chill, the sky pearl gray and just beginning to warm at the eastern edge, the figures moving slowly across the open ground, bending and rising and bending again, their robes brushing the dew-covered stones. No one rushes. The children help, their small hands quick and careful, and the old women gather as much as the young men, and what each one needs, each one finds. And when the sun climbs and the day's heat begins to press down on the land, the manna is gone and the ground is bare again, and the camp smells of wood smoke and the morning meal. The days accumulate in the wilderness the way stones accumulate in a dry riverbed, one after another, unhurried, each one much like the last, and yet never quite the same. A morning of pale gold light on rose-colored cliffs, an afternoon when the wind comes up from the south and pushes small eddies of dust across the plateau, spinning and dissolving. An evening when the sky turns 10 colors at once above the dark peaks, rose and amber and a deep bruised violet, and the first stars arrive before the last light is fully gone, so that for a little while both are present, the fading day and the beginning night, and the camp is quiet between them. At the heart of the camp, set a little apart from the other tents, there is a tent that is plainer and quieter than the rest. A desert tent of goat hair cloth, dark brown, and close woven against the wind, its entrance hung with a simple curtain, its ropes staked deep into the stony ground. The old story calls it the tent of meeting, a place where the people could come with what they carried, their questions and their burdens and their fears, and where Moses would go to listen. And sometimes, the story says, the cloud would come down and rest at its entrance, soft and still, and the whole camp would fall quiet and no one would move until the cloud lifted again. Moses, in these wilderness years, is a quieter figure than he was in the courts of Egypt or on the banks of the Nile at the beginning. The grandeur of those earlier years has been replaced by something simpler, a worn robe and a staff and a way of walking that belongs to a man who has spent many years on foot in open country. He knows how to read the angle of the light on the rock faces to find which direction holds the evening cool. He knows the look of the sky before rain. He carries the weight of all these people as a shepherd carries the flock, not dramatically but steadily, day after day, step after step. His brother Aaron walks beside him through many of these days, a steadying presence at his shoulder, and his sister Miriam moves among the people with a quiet sureness. A woman who has known this family's story since she stood in the reeds of the Nile as a small girl and watched the basket float and held her breath. She carries the memory of that morning still, the green smell of the river, the papyrus bending in the current, the sound of the princess's women on the water. And here she is now, decades later, in the middle of a vast desert, still carrying it, and the carrying has made her steady. The wilderness keeps its own time, not the time of courts and harvests and the flooding of the Nile, but something older and slower, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the phases of the moon moving in silver arcs above the desert, by the gathering of the manna and the resting of the cloud and the small fires in the evenings where people sit close together and speak quietly of where they have come from and where they are going. Children grow, old people slow. The flocks thicken or thin according to the land. The staff Moses carries grows more worn, and the cloud leads on. There are mornings when the air is so clear and still in the wilderness that it feels as though the world has been remade in the night. The rocks sharper edged, the colors deeper, the sky a blue so clean it seems to ring like a bell, and the silence itself has a quality of presence, as if the whole vast land is listening. On such mornings, the people move through their ordinary tasks, filling jars, feeding animals, laying out skins to dry, in a kind of hush, as if none of them wish to disturb whatever it is that has settled over the morning. And the cloud stands steady above them, and the day opens slowly, like a hand. And so the wilderness becomes, in time, familiar, as any great place becomes familiar if you live in it long enough. The people learn its water places, its shaded canyons, its wide, graveled plains where the walking is easy and the horizons open out in every direction for as far as the eye can reach. They learn to read the cloud and to trust it. They learn to gather the manna without wonder every morning, with the quiet efficiency of people doing something they have done 100 times, 1,000 times. And this familiarity is its own kind of gift, the gift of ordinary life in a strange land. The old story says the journey through the wilderness lasted many years, a long, long wandering, longer than anyone had imagined at the start. And yet the telling of it here, in the quiet of this night, need not carry the weight of those long years as a burden. They were years of manna and of water, years of a cloud that rested with them and a fire that burned for them in the dark, years of a people slowly becoming themselves, out here in the wide country, away from everything they had known, becoming people who could remember where they had come from and imagine where they were going and live day by day in between. And each night, when the last fire burns low in the camp and the children are asleep and the animals have settled and the stars are fully out above the desert, each night the glow of fire rests over the tent of meeting, soft and constant, the color of a banked hearth, neither blazing nor dying, The camp breathes around it slowly. A goat stirs. A rope creaks in the night wind. The desert is cold and enormous and alive with the small sounds that only come when everything else is still. The tick of cooling rock, the far-off sigh of the wind in a canyon, the silence beneath all of it, wide and old and quiet as sleep. The cloud and the fire, they do not need to be explained. They only need to be seen or imagined as the people who lived under them saw and imagined them. A tall, soft whiteness going ahead of you through the day, a warm glow keeping watch over your sleeping in the dark. Two faithful companions in an unfaithful land, and Moses walking beneath them year after year, staff in hand, feet worn and sure on the stony ground, carries in his chest the knowledge of where this long walking leads. A land somewhere ahead, a land of hills and water, a land he has been shown once from a great distance, the way you are sometimes shown the shape of something you do not yet hold, but will not forget. And so the wilderness holds them, fed and led and kept, in that great open country that has no end in any direction but the one they are walking toward. The manna gathers on the ground each morning like a quiet promise renewed, and the water runs from the rock when the rock is asked. And the cloud moves on slowly in the mornings when it is time to move, and rests at evening when the camp is made. And it is enough here in the wide night of the desert to hear it. The low sound of the wind, the small fires, the steady breathing of a people in rest, and to be still and to know the road goes on, and to let the darkness be gentle and to sleep. We follow him now toward the mountain. The days pass in a slow procession of stone and sky, the camp breaking each morning in the cool gray hour before the sun, the pillar of cloud moving ahead along the foot of the hills. And then one morning, the mountain is simply there, vast, dark at its base, its upper reaches hidden in a thick white stillness, and the people stop, and the camp is made in the shadow of something that cannot be measured. A hush falls over everything, softer than the hush of any previous evening. The mountain is old, older than anything the eye can easily hold. Its lower slopes are the color of iron and ash, streaked through with dark veins where the rock has split and healed across centuries beyond counting. Higher up, the stone gives way to shadow, and the shadow gives way to cloud, and the cloud sits over the peak like a great settled weight, neither moving on nor breaking apart, slow and thick and full of a light that is entirely its own. It is not frightening, not exactly. It's simply very still and very large. In the evenings, watching from the camp, the people can see a soft glow playing somewhere behind the cloud on the hidden peak. Not the orange of campfire, not the white of the moon, but something quieter, more inward. A luminescence, the way the inside of a shell holds light without giving it a source. The wood smoke from the campfires drifts upward and is absorbed into the lower air. The goats stand still at their tethers. The children sleep early here, and the older ones sit close and speak in low voices, the mountain present in every conversation, even when it goes unmentioned. The air here is different. It has a quality the desert had not prepared them for, a coolness that comes not from the night alone, but from the stone itself, from the altitude, from the cloud that keeps the sun from laying its full weight on the rock. There is a mineral scent on every breath, clean and sharp, the way water tastes from a deep stone well. Sandals are removed at the camp's edge nearest the mountain by some unspoken agreement, quietly. One person and then another, the worn leather laid in small rows on the pale ground. Moses looks at the mountain for a long time before he begins to climb. He stands at the camp's edge in the early morning, his staff in his hand, the cloud above him bright at its outer edges where the risen sun touches it, dark at its center where the peak is folded away. The story does not tell what he thinks in that moment, standing at the boundary between the plain and the slope. Perhaps he remembers another morning here, another bush, another fire. the smell of something warm and near and unhurried. He begins to climb, and the rock receives him. The lower slopes are slow and steady work, loose stone underfoot, the occasional scrub of some desert plant pressing up through a crack in the rock, the wind beginning to move more freely as the valley falls away below. The camp becomes small. The tents become pale squares, the people small dark points, the fires no more than tiny orange embers from this height. The sky is enormous up here, a deep and clear blue above the cloud that still caps the peak. And the silence is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something very full, holding its breath. And then the cloud takes him. Not all at once. First, the edges of it reach down and the air thickens. The light changes from the clear gold of morning to something softer and more diffuse, and the rock around him grows damp and cold under his hands where he braces against it. Then the white closes gently in on every side, and the valley disappears, and the sky disappears, and he is inside the cloud, moving upward through it, and the world below is gone. The people at the camp see the cloud receive him, and they watch the place where he vanished for a long time. The waiting begins. It is a particular kind of waiting, not the waiting before a meal, or the waiting for rain, or the waiting for a child to be born. It is the waiting of people who have been told something is being prepared for them, something they cannot yet see, and who must simply hold still in the interval. The camp settles into a patience that is partly trust and partly the simple fact that there is nowhere else to be. The mountain stands above them unchanged. Hour by hour, the cloud unchanged, the low glow unchanged, and the waiting becomes its own kind of occupation. Days pass. The bread-like dew still falls each morning on the ground outside the tents, fine and pale in the low slant light, gathered with cupped hands into bowls still warm from the night. The flocks are watered at the streams that run down from the mountain's base, cold and clear, tasting of stone and altitude. Children run between the tents at midday when the heat has softened into habit, and at evening the fires are lit one by one, and the mountain is there above them all the while, holding its cloud, holding its quiet, holding its light. There are nights in this waiting that are very beautiful. The cloud on the mountain catches the last light of the sun and holds it after the plain has gone dark, glowing from within with a warmth the eye reaches toward involuntarily, the way the eye is drawn to any light in darkness. The stars above the camp are extraordinary, so thick and close in the clear desert air that the sky seems itself a kind of cloth woven through with small, bright threads. The mountain's dark silhouette, rising against it like a great doorway into something that cannot be named. The people sleep under this sky and are not afraid. One morning, the old story does not count the days with precision, and perhaps that is right. The cloud on the peak shifts, not lifting entirely, but moving, thickening at the base of the summit and thinning at the edges, the inner light more pronounced, a low and gentle trembling in the air that is more felt in the chest than heard by the ear. The camp grows very still. The goats stop their wandering and stand in clusters, heads raised. Even the youngest children stop their play, sitting in the dust, looking upward without quite knowing why, the morning holding its breath around them. A sound moves through the air, not a crash, not a violence, but a low resonance, the way stone hums when a great weight is laid upon it, or the way the air in a deep cave seems to breathe. It is felt rather than heard, a fullness in the atmosphere that the body recognizes before the mind has a word for it. The cloud on the mountain moves in slow, long ribbons, lit from somewhere inside with a soft gold-white light. The people at the camp sit very still, their faces lifted, their hands quiet in their laps, and no one speaks, and the air goes on trembling, gentle and full. Inside the cloud, above the camp, above the world, the old story says Moses walked in a light that had no shadow and a silence that had no edge. The cold was clean and absolute, the stone under his feet worn smooth in places where nothing had worn it, the clouds so thick that up and down meant only where the rock led. He was there a long time. Long enough that the days below continued, and the bread fell, and the water was drawn, and the stars appeared and were gone and appeared again. The cloud kept him, and the cloud did not let him go, and whatever passed between him and the silence of that high place, he carried back down with him. Below, the camp learns the long grammar of waiting, waking and tending and feeding and resting, the ordinary hours acquiring a strange importance in the absence of direction. An elder sits at the entrance to a tent in the late afternoon, braiding cord from goat hair, her fingers moving by themselves, her eyes on the mountain above. A man repairs the sole of a sandal by lamplight, while the rest of his family sleep around him. A young woman rocks a child at the camp's edge in the blue hour before dawn, humming something without words, the mountain dark above her, the stars beginning to fade. The long wait grows hard in the way that waiting always does, eventually. The story acknowledges this quietly, without judgment, the way one acknowledges that fire is hot or water is cold. It is the nature of waiting, and these were people, and they were tired, and the mountain gave nothing back but cloud. There is a moment the story passes over gently, a time the camp grew restless, when the silence from the peak seemed too long, and the hearts of the people grew uncertain. The old story holds this moment without dwelling on it, the way one holds a stone in the hand and then sets it down. And then he comes down. The camp sees him before they can make out his face, a figure descending the lower slope in the afternoon light, slow and deliberate, carrying something. The rock around him is pale with a thin trace of cloud that has drifted low, and the light of the declining sun lies on the mountainside in long, warm bars, and he walks through them one by one, stepping carefully on the loose stone, and in his arms, held close, are two flat pieces of stone, plain and gray and not large, the size of things that can be carried, that can be kept close. He reaches the camp as the light is going golden, long and low, the way it goes in the late afternoon when the heat has eased and the air has a clarity that the midday never allows. People come toward him quietly, without rushing, reading something in his bearing. Not triumph, not urgency, but a steadiness, as though the mountain's own quality of stillness has come down with him inside his chest. He sets the two stone tablets. The old story says the words to live by were given on the mountain, written on the stone, offered as a kind of gift. Not a weight, but a carrying cloth, something to wrap around the daily life and make it legible. The tablets are not described in great detail by the story, and perhaps that too is right. Two plain stones from a high place, cool to the touch even in the warmth of the desert afternoon, their surfaces smooth in some places and rough where the grain of the rock runs close. A man kneels and touches one with a single finger, then stands again. Nothing else is needed. The mountain stands behind it all, its cloud beginning to lift a little as the evening comes on, the peak more visible now than it has been, the stone darker and more defined against the rose and copper sky. It looks, in this light, like something that has done what it came to do and is now simply resting, which is perhaps how all mountains look, after all, if one watches long enough. The fires are lit. The smell of wood smoke and roasting grain moves through the air. The tablets rest on their stone, and the people eat together in the dusk, and the mountain is behind them, and this, too, is a kind of peace. There will be many more mornings before they reach the land, many more breaking of camps, many more columns of cloud moving ahead on the road, many more evenings of fire and bread like dew, and the great wheeling stars. But something has been given here, at the foot of this mountain, in the long waiting and the long silence and the two plain stones. A way of holding the days, a shape for the life that the desert years are slowly, slowly making. Not yet complete, but enough. The mountain is there above them as they sleep, its clouds soft at the summit, its stone cool and still, and the night settles down around them, gentle and full. And so the camp rests in the shadow of the great mountain, the two stone tablets cool in the keeping place, the cloud resting on the peak as it has rested since they came, the fires burning low, the people grown still one by one as sleep takes them, the desert air moving just enough to stir the edges of the tent cloth. The mountain does not ask anything of them tonight. The waiting is over and the walking will come again. But for now the ground is flat and the night is mild and the tablets are near, and a whole people breathes slowly in the dark, learning, as all people, in all their wandering, must slowly learn, to set the day down and rest. We follow them now into the long middle years, the years that had no name but wandering, and were beautiful in their own way, as all long things slowly become beautiful when you stop counting them. The desert turned through its seasons, the cold blue mornings when the dew lay thick on the stones and the goats breathed small clouds into the air, and the high white afternoons when the sand held the heat like a palm holds a coal, and the evenings when the whole western sky went amber and rose and the camp grew fragrant with wood smoke and the smell of dried herbs crushed underfoot. The pillar of cloud moved before them always, soft and tall against the blue immensity of the sky, and when it rested, they rested, and when it lifted and began to drift again toward the horizon, they folded their tent cloth, loaded their bundles onto the patient backs of donkeys, gathered their flocks with low whistles and the quiet knocking of a staff on stone, and followed. They had learned to read the cloud the way a river people reads the water, not with anxiety but with a kind of settled attentiveness, the way you listen to something you have come to trust. Children grew up in that wandering who had never seen Egypt. Children who had never smelled the black river mud of the Nile or watched the great stone temples catch the morning light, who knew only the vast pale sky and the red and ochre mountains and the particular silence of the desert at night when the stars were so many and so close, it seemed the whole dark bowl of heaven was breathing. These children learned to walk long before they learned to read. They could find water by the color of a rock face and name the desert grasses by the scent of them crushed in the hand. And still in the mornings the manna came, that fine, pale, bread-like dew that appeared on the ground before the heat of the day took it, delicate as frost, faintly sweet, enough for the day and no more. The old story says they learned not to gather more than the day asked of them. The desert taught them that, the way the desert teaches everything, not by lecture but by the slow, persistent weight of days, the way a stone is shaped by water, not in a single hour but over a very long and patient time. Moses was growing old in those years, the way the desert mountains grow old, not diminished but worn to something essential, the softness all gone and only the deep grain of the stone remaining, the color of it richer for all the weather it had known. His hair had gone white as salt. His hands were very brown and very still. He still carried the staff, worn smooth now where his palm had rested on it 10,000 times, and when he planted it in the ground to rest, it stood steady as a small tree, as though it had put down its own roots. The tent at the heart of the camp was always there, a plain tent set a little apart where the two stone tablets rested in their wooden ark, the words to live by carried through all the wandering as carefully as water is carried through a dry land, never set down carelessly, never forgotten. Around it, the rest of the camp arranged itself each night like a wheel around an axle, the flocks at the edges, the fires toward the middle, the children's voices rising and then slowly falling into sleep, and the night deepening and the stars turning overhead in their great slow wheel. There were hard days in those years, days when the water ran low and the distances seemed to grow longer rather than shorter, and the heart of the people grew impatient and heavy with wanting to arrive. But the desert has its own mercy, and it came as it always comes in small things. A hidden spring at the foot of a cliff, a stand of tamarisk trees whose shade was absolute and cool, a night so perfectly still that the whole camp fell asleep to the sound of nothing at all and woke rested, as though the wilderness itself had held them gently through the dark. And the years turned over, and the cloud went before them, and the land grew slowly greener at the edges of sight. The hills ahead sometimes touched with a blue-green that was not the blue of sky or the gray of stone, but the color of living things rooted in good earth. And the air, some mornings, carried a faint green sweetness that the desert people breathed in very slowly, as though they were afraid to spend it too quickly. The land they had walked toward all these years was not a dream after all. It was there, ahead, in the late afternoon light, patient as a promise kept in silence. The old man climbed alone in the evening. There was no ceremony in it, only the slow, steady placing of one foot above the other on the pale stone of the mountain path, the staff finding each step before his weight did, the sky above him going from blue to gold to the deep rose of a day's last light. The climb did not hurry him, and he did not hurry it. He had walked too far and waited too long to hurry anything now. The rock was warm under his hand where the day's sun had been stored in it, and the wind at this height was gentle and smelled of dry grass and stone and the faint sweetness of the lowland far below. And then he reached the high place, and he looked out, and the land was there. The whole of it spread below him in the golden evening light, wide valleys and dark stands of cedar and the glitter of a river winding through the green, and beyond it, the hills rolling away into a distance so vast and so luminous it seemed less like a landscape than like light given the shape of home. He had walked toward this all his life. He had carried it through the reed water of the Nile and the dry weight of the desert and the long, patient years of the wilderness. And now it lay below him, golden and real and very still. He stood there a long time in the last of the light, the staff resting in the crook of his arm, the wind moving softly through his white hair, looking at all of it, the land he had led them toward and would not himself enter. He had known this, and he held it with the same quietness with which the mountain held the evening, not resisting it, not struggling, only standing in it with open hands. The old story says he saw it all, the whole wide length and breadth of it, from the river to the sea, from the mountains in the north to the warm plains of the south. He saw it, and it was good, and it was enough. And there on the mountain, the staff was laid down, leaned against the pale stone of the high place, and left there, standing for a moment in the last light before it settled into rest. The worn wood caught the evening sun along its length, every year of use held in the grain of it, every mile walked given back by the warmth of the stone it rested on. The long journey had been walked. The long carrying was done. On the mountain, in the evening, with the land golden and wide below, the journey was set quietly down. Far below, in the valley, the pillar of cloud rested over the camp as the night came on, soft and still above the tents, the way a mother rests her hand above a sleeping child without touching, just present, just near. The fires were small, bright points in the dark of the valley floor, and the sound that rose from the camp was the sound of a people at rest, voices low and then lower, the occasional cry of a child soothed back into sleep, the movement of the flocks settling, and then only the night itself, wide and quiet and whole. Above the mountain and above the camp, the stars came out one by one and then all at once, the enormous desert sky filling with that ancient light, those uncountable quiet fires that had looked down on the basket in the Nile reeds and the burning bush and the crossing of the sea and all the long, slow years of the wilderness, unchanged, unhurried, neither glad nor sorrowful, only present, only burning, the way the deepest things always simply are, asking nothing, offering everything, shining on in the dark. Somewhere in the camp, the two plain stone tablets rested in the quiet tent, the lamplight just touching the surface of the pale stone, the words cut deep and still and unhurried in the rock. Words carried through all the wandering, through all the years, arrived now at the edge of the land they had always been walking toward. The stone was cool and smooth. The light was very soft. Outside, the camp breathed. The long road had been walked now to its end, and the land lay golden in the memory of the day just gone. In a quiet tent at the edge of the camp, a single oil lamp burned low. The flame small now, amber, bending a little in some breath of air too gentle to be called a wind. The camp was asleep. The desert was asleep. The mountains stood in the dark above them all, patient and still. And then the flame bent once more and trembled, and let go a last thin curl of pale smoke that rose and dissolved into the dark of the tent and was gone, and the long road is walked now to its end. The land lies golden below, the journey is set down and the evening is kind, and it is enough now to rest. And so the lamp burns low on the story of Moses. Thank you for resting with us tonight. Until our next story, Lullaby Atlas, sleep well.